Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome to today's stream. My name is Ariana, and I am the co-director of the Consent Academy, an international Seattle-based nonprofit that aims to promote consent as part of everyday life. I am here in the rapidly setting sun of Vienna, Austria, and I hope wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you're having a good day. I really am thankful to everybody who likes to join me. Hello to Tibron. Hey, Krellin. Um, yes, there's a very good kitty that we're gonna see in a second. We also have my cat Babby here. He and I'm gonna move the chat as well. Uh, what's going on with this chat? Hold on. It's like cut off on the bottom. Um, Babby and I snuggled a lot last night. Charlie and I are currently sleeping in separate rooms for COVID precaution because Charlie went to a little conference yesterday evening. So we're gonna sleep a little separate and mask inside and everything just in case, because I'm at a lot higher COVID risk than he is. And so the cats normally sleep with us. And I got up, I had a terrible night's sleep last night. That is why I'm so tired. As a forewarning, this is like the first time I've been tired enough that I was like, maybe I should cancel today's stream because I'm so sleepy. But it's because I didn't get very much sleep last night. Because sometimes if you have really bad acid reflux, you can have it so it happens like while you're sleeping. And sometimes when that happens, you can actually start to choke in your sleep. And that happened to me a few times last night because I made the mistake of eating a little bit too late. Normally I manage it very well, so it's not a big problem, but I just ate a little too late in the evening um, because I had a stomach ache and I wanted to settle it, and it was too close to going to bed. Anyway, what happens is like you're asleep, and then suddenly your body sends out all the alarm bells of like, I'm literally dying, wake up, and your heart's racing so much, and you've got all this adrenaline, and then it's very, very difficult to go back to sleep. And it also happened to me twice last night, which was a real pain. So I didn't get very much sleep. So I will probably not be as coherent as I like to imagine I normally am. Anyway, I got up because I couldn't fall back to sleep and I was like wanting to just kind of calm my body down and walk around. And I found cute little Babby. He's over here right now, just looking out the window, being cute. Um, Sleeping on the chair by our front door, looking very like sad. And so I picked him up and brought him back to bed with me, and we literally just spooned the whole night. He's gotten way more comfortable with like more serious cuddles, and it's been pretty great. Anyway, I know this is like a total random thing to tell you all, but that's yeah. That'd be super cute. They're both very cute. Also, I am looking a bit more Seattleite than usual to Tiburon for two main reasons. One, it's pretty cold. I'm keeping the heat. I have the heat on, but quite low because there's gas crisis in Europe and the prices are a lot higher. Um, Also, I'm enjoying my like very goth increase in the under eye bags. Like, kind of looks fashionable, I think. Like, not getting very much sleep last night. I'm just like, damn. Also, I think I mentioned this before, but couple months ago, I looked at my under eye bags and I was just like, oh, I'm aging. Oh, I'm so sad. Like, this is really bumming me out. Like, what can I do about it? And then Facebook reminded me of a picture from my literal high school graduation, and they were worse. And I was like, I've always just had under eye bags. I've always just looked like I am desperately in need of more sleep. Probably because I am. But it's also, genetic, having like very translucent skin in general. What was I going to talk about? I'm really excited to hang out with y'all today. I was gonna just like be very chill and pretty much just play Stardew Valley today, but I actually had the energy to put a couple things together. Um, and one of the things that's really inspired me is like some things I've been seeing recently in some online discourse that I think is actually it's something that's been going on for a long time. And I think that there's always been bad faith discourse and just like bad takes and stuff. But there's like some particular things that I think are happening. Hi, Paladin Hulk, welcome. That I think would be fun to talk about. I still want to do like a video or a podcast episode with Ash talking about the chili incident a bit more in depth because consent got really brought up in it. And I think there's a few things to really unpack there. But um yeah, Discord, I mean, it's just this is how I think about it. There's always stuff we can learn from it. There's always things that are like useful, even looking at bad discourse, like picking apart, like why is it bad? Like, is the actual like logic not very good? Are there logical fallacies? Are there like, rhetorical manipulation tactics where they're like cherry picking data or, glossing over things or using emotive language to like, there's all these kinds of like things. But then there's also just failure to consider context or being unaware of context as often, I think, something that leads to a lot of bad takes. Um, and I think that this could easily be like a kind of snake eating its tail sort of thing where we just kind of keep getting ourselves more worked up into this race to the bottom, in essence. But there's still some things that I think we can talk about. Anyway, I wanted to start with this really cute, this cat. I want you need to all see this cat. Is there actually audio on this? No. All right, this cat. Just look at this little kitten go to it just put its whole face in water. It just put its whole face in the water. If you can't see this, it's a cat going to drink from a little dish of water and it's glass, you can see into it, and the cat literally just puts its whole face into the bowl and then brings its head up and then just like lems as the water's dripping off its face. I'm just going to show it to you all again because it's really worth it. Also, wait, backing up. You can see here, looking at like the little dribbles on the chin and the wet whiskers, even though this is pretty low res, this cat has been doing this. But anyway. Oh, that's good. That's good, right? That's just, look at that good kitty. Look at this adorable face. Uh, yeah, I mean, there's lots of different creative ways to drink. There was a phase of my childhood where I was just like, I'm gonna try to drink like an animal because it's got to be more efficient. And I saw this like video of like how animals like slow mo. I think it was like on the Discovery Channel or something of like how dogs and cats like lick water. And then I was like, I'm gonna do that. And then it took me a little while to accept that like it actually wasn't efficient, you know. Um, but this cat is good. I'm gonna just do it one more time. It's only 8 seconds. Last time. Look at this. Just, yes. Oh God. Cats are so cute. Okay. All right. So a couple other funny videos. This is a tweet from John, who is at ARF Measures. And it says, me, orders our food fluently in Italian to impress my date. McDonald's drive-through employee. What? You're, hey, Aradin. Krellin, you're absolutely right. Animals drink how they do because they don't have hands. Child logic me, though, did not understand that. Child me was just like, clearly animals are better than people. Like there's this phenomena that happens with a lot of children, especially kids who like are having a time as children, which is like the misplaced prince or princess fantasy, which is that like you were accidentally adopted or like taken home from the hospital by the wrong family, and one day your real parents are going to show up and take you away from everything. And often the fantasy is like they're a prince or princess, right? This is something that has existed for a lot of history, but yeah. Anyway, when I was a teenager, or not a teenager, when I was a small child, I had a variation on this fantasy, but it was that I was an alien. And that I used to have these stories that like my parents were not necessarily very important to aliens, but that there was like some intergalactic war happening between my people and some other people, and like my parents left me on the earth for safekeeping, and like I was actually a shapeshifter, and like I just didn't know. And I thought one day I would know, because then I would just like shapeshift into an animal and like run away. Anyway, you know, children invent a lot of fantasy to help them process the world around them. And I was particularly interested in the idea of one, being an alien, and two, being able to shapeshift into being not human. And I had some very interesting types of body dysmorphia, which we're gonna talk about. Look at look at the babby. He's just over here to investigate. My cats recently have also been doing this thing that if I don't immediately present them with a lap, which is tough because I try to sit like really ergonomically at my desk, they will get annoyed and they'll like start digging at me. And I was actually, this desk can stand up, and I was standing at it recently, and Cutie came over and she was literally just digging at my chest for a while, being like, "Where's the lap? Where's the lap?" And I'm like, "You cats are very spoiled. I literally give you everything you want every time you ask for it. Sometimes I need to set boundaries though." Okay. Paladin Hulk, you said, "I've always dreamed of being an Englishman in New York, so we're basically twins." Yeah, I mean, you know, people have different types of fantasies about what being something else might be. And I think that it's often uh, can be a nice coping mechanism. And it's fantasy. And there's definitely, some things where you can just become the thing. Like furries exist. I'm not a furry, but I could say a furry sympathizer, where it's just like, it's definitely not for me, but for people it is for. I'm just like, yes, I am thankful that you all have this community. Okay, continuing. Aradinu said, "I agree with cats being adorable. One of my kittens is trying to sleep on me." Nice. So then I like this. It just made me also think of whatever it is Elon Musk is trying to do, except Elon Musk doesn't speak fluent Italian, as far as I know. Continuing. Um, this is, it's 4 p.m. ish here, and the sun is going down very quickly. And this is a Calvin and Hobbes, and they're looking up at the sky, and Calvin says, "I love looking at the stars on a clear winter night," and Hobbes says, "It's only 4 p.m. It's just legit, just real these days. This one was also cute. Rodney said, "I think I wanted to be a dragon or a wolf when I was younger." Yeah, I think those are also pretty common. Like I think it's some of it comes down to like wanting different types of freedom, wanting to express a sense of like power, not exactly power, but like social acceptance, because things like wolves and dragons, I think we have a lot of mythology around them. I think it's very common. I think a lot of people are like, my inner self is a wolf or a dragon or a horse or, a big cat. Uh, because we ascribe in a lot of sort of like Western thought a certain type of nobility to them, a certain type of like cultural mythos and power, a certain type of like they are aloof and misunderstood and different than us, but also like majestic and all this other stuff. And I think a lot of kids who are socially excluded or struggle with friendships or just having a rough time, that's also a very appealing thing to them, because it's sort of like, I wouldn't need to change anything per se about like my self, who I am as a person on the inside, but if I could simply like have a way to outwardly display to the world around me something of my inner essence, maybe I would be more accepted or treated better or given more, power in the social context or whatever. This is not to say this is the only reason why. Like, I mean, dragons are just cool. Like, who hasn't fantasized about being a dragon? Sometimes there's cool, but I think that there's also similar to the like kids who are having a rough time often having these sort of like my real parents will come and rescue me someday fantasies, often choosing to have their parents be really rich or some kind of nobility or something. Yeah. Um Krellin, you said Elon is desperately trying to win Grimes back even after cheating on her and getting an employee pregnant. Yeah, I mean like how do I want to think about this? So Elon Musk, like as a person, as an individual, I like feel kind of bad for him. Like I get being like the weirdo neurodivergent kid who's like super nerdy, but also like a little too spacey to be like that deep into any particular nerdy thing to like be like hardcore about it. So just kind of bouncing around about a bunch of different things and wanting to be funny. Like that is something I really relate to. Like the dude definitely wants people to think that he's funny and he's not. And I get like I've been there. I really thought that the way to overcome my social isolation as a kid was to be the funny person. And most of the time that just actually opened me up to more bullying. So I get it. I get wanting that and I get I also think that with Twitter, Elon Musk wanted to back out of it, and I think that there's a little bit of like sunk cost stuff going on where it's like trying to make the best of a situation that you didn't want to be in. So I think it's kind of a combination of many things going on with Elon Musk. And so like as an individual human being, I can feel really bad for him and have a lot of empathy and be like, I think I've talked about this before, but um a lot of times when I see certain types of people dancing, I just get like these big signals of like trauma because I think that there's a really good book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's about how like trauma affects our bodies. And one of the things that really happens with a lot of trauma is that like we will hold certain muscles in constant tension, especially ones in our core, and especially the psoas, which are right on the back here. I'll turn around and you can't really see me. That's not helpful. You can't really see me. Oh, actually, I can just lift my shirt up and you can see my back. So the psoas are the muscles right here. So they kind of go from here and they actually go like inside and anchor down here to like hold all of this in place. And then they go all the way up to here and you can feel them. They often can be kind of tender. If you ever a lot of like sciatica can be really tied to it. There's a lot that's going on with the psoas. But anyway, there's all this cute writing about it, and they'll call the psoas the like anchor of the soul and all this other stuff. But it's sort of these muscles that are really intrinsically connected to coordination and like how we move, how we walk. And also a lot of like, do you look like you're able to actually dance? Because a lot of times when people can't dance, it's a combination of things like not necessarily like setting the foundations of good proprioception as a child, um, not necessarily having much rhythm or musicality, or like not knowing which beats to move on. Like, are you clapping on the one and the three or the two and the four? And also just being like afraid, but that comes back to trauma. So the psoas are considered to be sort of like muscles that really hold a lot of trauma because they're really, need to engage in certain ways to sort of like for fight and flight, which we're going to talk about related to some online discourse in a minute. But if you've had a lot of trauma and you haven't processed it, there can be a much harder time in actually connecting with your intrinsic muscles to be able to do things like body rolls, which is like, a big thing you see in a lot of Latin dances and like West Coast swing, but then also just like to move your hips really well to sort of, um, you know, connect the rhythm between the bottom half of the body and the top half of the body. I mentioned I used to be a professional ballet dancer, and like the school of thought that Boston Ballet had was like a Balanchine, which was instead of like dividing the body for top and bottom, you did it right to left, and you often did it crisscross. So, like, what the right leg is doing should correspond to something that the left arm is doing, and this other thing. So, it's sort of thinking about the body in a slightly different way, but kind of like dividing it by the sides. But being able to sort of coordinate movement between the upper and lower body, these muscles are really important. And when I look at people like Trump, Theresa May, Elon Musk, a lot of these people who, are very white, and I mean that as like capital W white, um, which means the like sort of culturally white and often with a lot of white supremacist thinking, not necessarily in directly thinking that white people are better, but sort of the white supremacy culture. Um, and I think that that is its own kind of trauma. Sort of being raised in that cultural mindset creates a different type of cultural trauma where everything is about a dominator model of reality. It's a zero sum game. It's you have to be on guard all the time. If you're not the winner, you are the loser. And if you are the loser, you are unsafe and you deserve bad things to happen to you. Like there's all of the stuff that kind of goes into it. And I think because it puts people fundamentally in this very precarious situation, even when they have power, it leads to them kind of being stuck on guard all the time. And this is one of the things that's like, I'm not trying to say like, oh, they basically have affluenza and we should feel horrible for them. But like, it just helps me realize, or I think it's a great example, not necessarily for me, but for everybody, of like how undesirable this kind of position should actually be for us and why we really shouldn't hero worship these people because they're just kind of sad. 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 Anyway, that's one of my tangents. So what else did you all say? Paladin Hulk Elon has the problem of being surrounded by yes men. All his bad behavior and bad ideas are reinforced and supported. I think that's definitely true. And I also think that like getting this constant sort of positive feedback from fanboys. Like if I had legions of fans, they were just constantly telling me that I'm like, genius, goddess or something, that would probably have a bad impact on me over time. And one of the ways I try to prevent that is like being just very honest about my humanness. Like if I showed you what's on my nightstand, which I can't because I don't have nightstands because I can't get my shit together enough to buy some, um, and everything's just on the floor next to my bed. I wouldn't try to present it as look how cool I am. And like it seemed kind of staged and like if you don't know what I'm talking about, like Elon Musk tweeted out a picture of what's on his nightstand, which was very strange and kind of sad. Yeah. I just wouldn't try to pretend like it was anything other than what it is, right? Like I wouldn't try to say like my nightstand is some great insight into like how cool I am as a person or like how interesting I am. I'm not gonna like go and pull out like all of my books on like ethics and like carefully stage them next to like my Star Trek figurines and stuff on my nightstand to make you think that I mean those things are a part of who I am. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that yeah, it's all just kind of sad. Um yeah. Yeah, and there's this book that I've been reading by a philosopher. It's called You and Your Profile: Authenticity After Profilicity, and it's basically looking at authenticity in the age of social media. It's to me kind of an extension of like a lot of what Sartre was talking about in books like The Fall, which is like how do I know who I really am versus who I am because of or how I act because of what I want other people to see me as. And I think authenticity can become a kind of never-ending trap. I think I've mentioned this before. SLC Punk, I think, is a really good movie for talking about like authenticity and identity, but like I don't necessarily agree with the conclusions that the movie comes to. Um, I think maybe for that character's subjective experience, not giving away any spoilers, like yes. And I also think that saying that identity is not something one can also construct and become what one wills is, I think, a losing game. Anyway, setting that aside, today's not a philosophy lecture. And I'm also not actually a philosopher. I've like taken very few actual philosophy classes. Most of my understanding of philosophy is like just being a nerd. Um, and then psychology. So yeah. Anyway, Krellin, you said, quote, I feel bad about your trauma, but your trauma doesn't excuse the harm you're doing to others. Exactly. Yeah, for sure. It doesn't excuse it. It's not something where I'm gonna like look at Elon Musk and just be like, yeah, it's okay that you're like, you know, doing all this bullshit. Yeah, yeah. Um, Nightstand is a great comedy superhero name. I agree. Paladin Hulk, Aradin kind of staged. I'd say very staged. You know, I wonder how staged it was because it was like just to me like all of the like rings from like cans and cups put on there to me just didn't. I don't know. Like if I were gonna stage something, I would actually want to make sure it's really clean. Like sometimes I take really cute pictures of my cats and I'm like, oh, I want to upload this, and then I'm like, oh, but like I didn't stage it and the carpet has a ton of cat hair on it and like that's all I can see. I don't really want to upload this. Um because even though that's like real, it's just kind of uh I think detracts from how enjoyable the picture or the video might be because it's just like, oh yeah, I really need to vacuum. Anyway, Krellin, you said my nightstand holds a lamp, a bowl for kibble, another bowl for water, and my really ancient Windows 8 tablet. Yeah, yeah, that sounds about right. Paladin Hulk, my nightstand is where I keep my stack of books I might want to read. That's also, yeah. I have my stack of books that I'm currently reading always to my right over here. I've got, I just finished reading Brave New World with a client of mine, so I still do some like culture and intercultural communication training. And I have a client who's never read like any literature, never. And also has lived in Europe for like 30 plus years, but is from China originally and has like no context for like Christianity and how it affects European thought and has all these questions. And also, like, we talk a lot about politics and we've been going through some literature. I think I've mentioned before we read Ender's Game, absolutely blew his mind. He had no idea literature could be so cool. And then we just finished reading Brave New World, which I think horribly depressed him. And like, it's very interesting. Then I'm reading slowly this collection of short stories by Alan Moore. It's called Illuminations. And it's really good. I'm a huge Alan Moore fan. And so it's nice to actually have something that I love his comics. I think Crossed Plus 100 is my favorite of all the Alan Moore comics. Especially, I just love the word skull babies. It's the future post apocalyptic word for thoughts, and it's just magnificent. Um, but this is really nice. I've got my other book is actually By My Bed. I'm also been coming back through some Victor Nabokov's short stories. This is Lance and a few others. Those are things I've been reading recently. Anyway, setting that aside, here's a cute comic. And I think this is good because I think it's good about consent framework. So it's a 4-panel comic by theycantalk.com, and it's a cat and a dog. And in the first panel, the dog and cat, they're both looking up, and the dog says, throw the treat, I'll catch it. The next panel is a close-up on the dog's face and says, just throw it. And then the cat says, can you please place mine on the floor? And in the last panel, the dog has got his paw on the cat's face, and the dog says, "Throw it at my face." Um, and I like this because one is very cute. It's like very much, someone who grew up with cats and dogs. It's very much this sort of interspecies interaction. Cats and dogs can be truly great companions for each other, and they still have like some very different ways of experiencing reality. But I think it's really good because it's like both of these animals want this treat, right? They're both going to get a treat, and they both have this negotiation with the person giving them the treat. And they're both consenting to getting a treat. However, they fundamentally want this treat to come to them in completely different ways. And for the cat, if you just threw the treat at the cat's face, the cat would not enjoy that. The cat would, some cats might, but generally speaking, that's not how cats sort of interact with that. They would prefer that you like hand it to them or you put it on the floor and they can sniff it and then eat it. Whereas a lot of dogs kind of prefer the challenge of catching it in their mouth, and then they like to taste it, and then maybe they spit it back out. There are lots of things where like dogs will literally sniff something, put it in their mouth, taste it, and then spit it back out. Whereas cats, they just have a different approach to food. But they're both saying yes to this treat, but they have completely different ways they want to experience the treat. And the thing is neither way is wrong. Both are completely valid ways to experience this. And this is one of the things that really comes up with some of this internet discourse that I want to talk about more in depth, is that it is absolutely true that other people are going to have different experiences of reality than you. And that doesn't mean they're wrong. And I mean this both in when I'm critiquing people's discourse, but also in my critique of their discourse. Like, for what those people are saying, even if I say, hey, this is bad discourse, and I think you're saying this in bad faith, or you're like neglecting this context, because they feel this way and have written this thing, especially if I give them the benefit of the doubt and don't think that they're just doing it for clout or whatever, if I think they're actually doing it in a way that's genuine, it also means that this is their own experience of reality. The thing I'm often going to argue with is the coming to an absolutist conclusion about a lot of things, because we're going to have different experiences of the world. It's the same with like my mom will get street harassed and likes it. She likes it when men like catcall her. It makes her feel good. For me, it really depends. Like, I've had times where like people have said like, oh, you're so lovely. Like I got catcalled a lot in France, but it was always like people would tell me I had a lot of class, or like I was really beautifully dressed and stuff. And that to me was just kind of like funny and novel. But like I've also had catcalling where it's gotten very either annoying or uncomfortable. And I can't go and tell my mom, you are wrong to enjoy this thing. You are wrong that this thing is not outside of your consent, because that's not for me to say. Now, we could still talk about like a societal level of like, do we want to encourage behavior that can often be non-consensual and leads to sort of like certain types of sexism and like control of women's movement through spaces, and like can be also very threatening and like can lead to violence when rejected. No, we don't want to do that. And simultaneously, it is also completely okay that my mom likes it when a young guy whistles at her. Exactly. So this is, you're right, Paladin Hulk. The cat caller has no idea if someone is or isn't consenting and probably should err on the side of caution. Now, one of the bigger things is that, like, with consent, it's kind of complicated because we often talk about at Consent Academy that consent is not about perfect pre-planning or being able to read somebody else's mind. But we do also have default consent frameworks. So we do have established cultural norms about what is and isn't appropriate to do, say with a stranger in public. And if we basically come to the conclusion as a society that catcalling is not okay, then that is the consent framework we need to operate with from the default. However, if we had other ways of expressing openness to, say, flirtation on the street, that would still be okay, but we can only get to that. Like we could develop a culture where like if a person is walking around with like a green scarf on, everybody understands that means that they're like single and they're open for, romantic advances. Right, like cultures will often have this kind of thing. Like in Japan, kimono for women had long and short sleeves, and if you had long sleeves, it meant that you were unmarried. And once you got married, you would switch to short sleeves. Or like, you know, uh, a maiko or a geiko. Also, people call it a geisha, but it depends on if you're talking about northern or southern Japan. The maiko were the ones in training, and they would wear much more colorful costumes, or not costumes, but kimono, but also have a lot more adornment and jewelry. And that was meant to signify, hey, don't judge me too harshly. I'm still in training. And also, like, don't notice how many mistakes I'm going to make. I'm going to distract you with all this decoration. Whereas, like, a fully trained geiko would often wear, like a solid color kimono or something with very minimal decoration on it and have very few hair ornaments and wear subtler makeup because it was supposed to be like they had achieved this thing. So then also like how you were expected to be able to interact with each one was different. Obviously, there are huge differences between like the different geisha districts, even within a place like Kyoto or Nara or Tokyo can be a big difference. But um, we can have these different things, and like many cultures have developed these sorts of things. However, we can't get to that conversation unless we have like a solid sort of shared foundation from which to discuss. And then if we don't have that, erring on the side of caution really is appropriate. Okay, so let's continue. I just wanted to, I had some pictures I wanted to share of like pretty buildings. I'm just going to share them real quick. This is Ghent, Belgium. Um, I really like how different architecture in even just like France to Belgium, even just northern France to Belgium looks, and then even Vienna and Belgium or Austria and Belgium. It's so different. It's very nice. And then here is this really beautiful place in India. I just really enjoy it. And this is all on Reddit's Architectural Revival subreddit. So anyway, I want to look at a little bit of discourse and talk about it before we play some games. So I'm not sure if I'll have time today to talk about infrastructure stuff. I can save it for next week. Aradin, you said, I think it also touches on the whole youth equals beauty concept that is seen in media. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. So we have here, now I do want to start by saying I am not encouraging any of you to go and harass any of these people. I did not sort of censor their usernames because I want to interact with their ideas and I want to give them credit for their ideas. So I don't want to just sort of like decontextualize it. And also like being able to actually interact with some of the things about like who somebody actually is on the internet, how they're presenting themselves through their profile is really important. However, I really want to stress again, please do not go and harass these people. That is not the point. Okay, so we have here this tweet by Clarkeisha Kent, and it says tap sign, and then it's a picture that's a two-panel sort of meme that shows what's his face from Scooby-Doo removing the bad guy's mask, and he says, okay gang, let's see who this ghost really is. And the first panel shows the word body dysmorphia in quotes. Fred, thank you, Aronin. And then it takes off the mask and it says fat phobia underneath. And so, this is essentially trying to communicate the idea that body dysmorphia is actually underneath just fat phobia. And the whole idea of tap sign means a way of communicating like this is an idea that is well understood, and I'm pointing it out again because I have to point it out so often. I have a sign related to it. And Sean Bernard on Twitter is how I saw this meme and retweeted a really good point. Have said it before, but it's quite something how they've managed to repopularize your mental illnesses caused by your own moral failings. So if you are not aware, for even still to this day, but for most of history, like mental health issues were often seen as personal failure, as, you are morally bad, therefore you, should not get help for this thing. You are not a victim. You don't need support. If only you just had more virtue, if you were more good, then you would not have these mental health issues. And it's where we get a lot of the kinds of pushback of saying to somebody who's got, say, depression or ADHD, like, just do X, Y, and Z. Just do this thing. That's all you have to do. Or just like think happy thoughts, as though, exactly, Rodden, you're depressed because you're lazy. And those are really damaging ideas. And we also have within, and I've mentioned it before, within a lot of discourse, there's this idea of like wanting to have perfect intellectual, moral purity. You know, we're okay to a certain extent of people being like, okay, yeah, when I was a teenager, I had kind of started to go towards the alt-right, but then I was like de-radicalized, and here's how I did it. Like, we kind of like those stories, especially if they're from like, attractive, skinny white guys who are trying to like say, I was just so innocent, I didn't know any better. We tend to not give the same grace to everybody else, but that's not to say that people don't deserve this grace. I do actually think that, children have a lot less sort of culpability for a lot of these things than adults do. And what somebody has done or said when they are a child should be held to a different standard. Now, it doesn't mean that that is true with everything, to the extent of like, we shouldn't hold someone accountable for the things they do when they're young, but it's that we need to take it in that context of, is this representative of a pattern that has persisted? Or is this representative of some sort of like, particular type of problem? Or was this, something that was developmental that maybe the person needs to take accountability for because of the impact that is maybe still being felt by people, maybe even decades later? Okay, so getting away from this tangent, because I could keep going with this. Any kind of, how do I want to say this? So there's a certain kind of social currency, and I myself am completely guilty of this. Like, I'm not going to pretend like I am not implicated by any of these things or that I'm above them. But I think that, let me just give you all the example of my own profile on Twitter. So this is my profile at Genki Soda. I've got it in my little video frame. This is not me trying to get you to follow me. This is just to sort of talk about this. There's a certain kind of social currency, and nobody had to tell me to do this. It's just sort of something like I saw happening, and then I was like, okay, this makes sense. Where like, if you want to talk about something, especially related to social issues or social justice, people often want to know very quickly, should they assume you're talking about something in good faith, and what authority do you have to talk about this thing? We saw this kind of with the attack helicopter short story, where someone wrote this short story. I personally really liked it and found some of it, very, evocative and very moving. It was playing off of this sort of transphobic joke about like, I identify as an Apache attack helicopter, and someone decided to use that as a launching point to talk about things like the weaponization of gender and gender performance, and like the pseudo wokeness of the military, right? Like, we can even see like a lot of the military has social media, or even as advertising, is pretending to be incredibly woke, and it's not, and it's just for the sake of raising its profile and making it seem, less of a really, horrific thing. Anyway, thank you for the compliment, Aradin. Um, so then, because people were not sure if this person was a cis woman or a man or a trans woman, they kind of just like attacked this short story and immediately assumed that it was trolling. And the reality was it was a trans woman who was definitely writing about in some ways, their own experience. And there's a thing that comes up a lot where people will say, this representation does not match my personal experience of this type of marginalization. Therefore, it is harmful to me. But the thing is, we also try to simultaneously talk about how no group is a monolith. And we can forget this. I also think that, yeah, I would love to hear Trooper talk about all of these things. I could just literally listen to Trooper talk forever. Yes. We have this kind of way of saying, like, we're not all a monolith, but also, like, if I don't personally identify with this representation, it is bad and wrong and it is harming me. And I'm not going to say whether or not someone is experiencing harm because it's only really for them to say from an honest report. And like, we need to have a shared definition of the difference between like upset, hurt, harm, and trauma. And like, these are all very different things. And we need to actually be able to have some kind of shared definition of these things if we really want to talk about it, which we often don't. But they're still communicating that they feel bad, right? There's a negative feeling that they do not wish to be having in response to this. Yeah, well, like that's kind of normal with a lot of literature. Like I've read, I don't read the book Lolita and think like, yes, this is a perfect representation of like my adolescent sexuality. I'm like, no, this is like incredibly fucked up. And like the book is not meant to be a romantic portrayal of like an older man preying on a prepubescent girl. Like, in the book, she's like 12. In the movie, she's like aged up to 16. I think the movie, I really fucking hate the movie because I think it actually completely misses the point of the whole book, because the book was supposed to be talking about how it was a confession. It was like, admission of guilt, and the main character, the guy who abuses the child, like is aware of the tremendous harm that he has caused and the ways in which what he did was wrong, and also like can find no real joy even in his memories of the things that he has done. And I think it's really great in contrast to Ada, which is like a story about this old couple told through, I can't remember. I've read too many books recently. Through letters to each other, but it's like an older brother and sister who are like an incestuous couple, and it's just a joyful thing because they were consenting, and they were like, they got into this romantic relationship when they were much older. And this is not me trying to say that I like condone incest, but I think the consent there is fundamentally different between like two consenting adults and a literal child. And when I read Lolita, I don't read it and think like, yes, this is, representative of who I was at this time. I see myself in this. I don't read it and feel comfortable. That's not the point of this art. The point is to express something of human experience and give us the opportunity to analyze it, which is not to say that we cannot condemn certain types of art. This is not to say that we cannot be outraged by it, but it doesn't necessarily mean there is nothing of merit, that it is bad or wrong. It is just art. And let me back up. I don't mean to say it's just art, because it's never just art. But what I'm trying to say is sometimes the point is to make you feel uncomfortable. And reading Attack Helicopter, I was like, I think the point of this is to make you feel uncomfortable, but in a good faith way. It's like not trying to troll. It's literally trying to talk about like how, leftist ideals and even something as a personal experience of gender can be both social constructs and also get weaponized. And anyway, circling back, there's a certain cultural cachet in open self-disclosure. And you can see this, I think, pretty well in my own bio here. You only got so much space to write who you are. And I really wanted to talk to, here are the things that I am likely to talk about on my social media. And here is the perspective from which I'm talking about them. I don't like this. Like, if you went back a few years ago, my profile was usually like some ridiculous joke or something. But as it currently stands, if I don't want to get dogpiled, it is slightly inoculating to have this sort of like disclosure of your intersections of marginalization as much as possible. Now, there are way more things about me that cannot be contained in this. There are other marginalizations I experience. There's a ton of privilege that I experience that cannot be written here. I make sure to have a very accurate picture of my face to be like, look, I am definitely also white. I say I'm a consent educator because I am. I'm a nerd because I also want people to know that about me. I'm queer. I try to talk about my ethnicity and even my positionality within my ethnicity. I'm a reconnecting Choctaw that is signifying, hey, I am, I did not grow up on the res. I did not grow up, surrounded by kin. I did not grow up in a community that claims me. And I am working to undo a certain type of intergenerational trauma that led to those circumstances. Okay, neurodivergent, I'm disabled, multiply disabled. I'm also an ordained Buddhist monk. Cool. So these are the things I wanted people to know about me. And I also say that I'm in the birthplace of Celtic culture, which Austria is considered to be. Okay. So I bring this up because I really want to stress that, like, I do this too. Right? Like, this is not me trying to say someone's doing something wrong. I do this as well, right? I want people to know. And it gives people a certain place of authority from which to speak. If I want to talk about, say, queer issues or neurodivergence, and someone doesn't agree with me, I can say, well, you can't criticize me because I'm neurodivergent. Now, I would not take that particular stance individually. I prefer my ideas to sort of stand on their own merit rather than use my sort of like positionality, though there are times where my position is actually something that grants authority. I feel like this is very abstract today, but it's something I really want to talk about in depth. So then we go back to this tweet and we can see that the person who made the kind of missing the mark meme writes that they're a Nigerian American, Black, fat, and fat is in all capital letters, and they're author of Fat Off, Fat On. And so that's telling us a lot about them, right? And I'm not saying that this person is doing this. I do not want to stress that, but I'm just trying to talk about a bigger issue that happens in general, where sometimes people feel like the more intersections of marginalization I have, the more insight I have, the more authority I have. Not necessarily true. It can be true. And I'll be able to speak to, like, as someone who has been homeless and who has, escaped domestic violence and has experienced all kinds of different forms of trauma, I can speak to those things. But when it comes down to it, I can only speak to my personal experience of homelessness. Right? I cannot speak to someone else's experience of homelessness because I'm not them. So I can say, like, here are the circumstances that led to me becoming homeless. Here are the ways I experienced homelessness. Here's where that fits within context and within statistics. And then also, here are the things that got me out of it. And here's what I would have liked. Here's what would have helped me. But for somebody else, these things might be completely untrue, and neither of us is wrong. Like, that's the point here. It's like, it's okay for us to have different experiences of the same thing. I would agree, Aradin. I'm trying to cover my bases, all my bases, so people can't tell me I'm wrong kind of mentality. That's exactly it. Is like, I want to have a certain type of authority points. Therefore, I will not be able to be criticized. And it's tough because this also came out of a place that is like legitimately important, which is that we have a long-standing history of particular people within, Western hegemony who have all of the power coming in and telling other people what their experiences are. So if like, a wealthy, intergenerationally wealthy, abled, cis het white man, who's part of the gentry in England comes and tells me like, here's what I should have done to not, experience domestic violence and homelessness. Like I would just tell that dude to fuck off because our contexts are so different that it's very unlikely he's going to have anything insightful to say to me. And probably what he's going to have to say to me is going to maybe even be reminiscent of the very things that put me into that position in the first place. So, wanting to push back against white splaining and mansplaining and like just sort of like, completely unexamined privileged positions is important. However, Bernie Sanders, I think, is a great, Bernie Sanders, I'm not saying is perfect, but that's not a man who's experienced every form of marginalization on the planet. I mean, he's like pretty wealthy, especially compared to most people, and like has a lot of power, has been in Congress for a million years, and is like considered to be the amendment, king or whatever. I forget what they really call him. And he's got good things to say. Is he right on everything? No. Does he make mistakes? Yes, he's human. And so I think that both of these things can exist at the same time. And, it's, yeah, it's difficult. Let me see what you all are saying. Aradin, old white male rich, that is a lot of privilege, and Paladin Hulk, only human after all. So the point here is that, like, this person's original tweet could mean most of the times when they're interacting with somebody else's body dysmorphia, or maybe even their own body dysmorphia, if they have it, I cannot say, that they look at it and see that its origin is fat phobia. However, this is being presented without that context or without that nuance. Now, there's also another problem that happens in a lot of internet discourse, which is this idea of if I can have the most right opinion and have the most nuanced take and literally consider every single possibility, uh, then I am the best and I have the most rightness. Yeah, Carlin, Bernie being white and Jewish, these are things that are very contextual, right? Like, even my own whiteness, like, when I play my cards right, nobody ever suspects a thing about me. And uh, I get to walk through the world as, like, a cute white woman. And that gives me a lot of certain types of privilege and is also very contextual. When I am granted whiteness, I've also had like situations where I've been denied it and things have gotten pretty hairy pretty quickly, or really just like shitty meetings where like I'm a little too indigenous about things or just not Western enough about things, maybe too Buddhist even. Um, and then that sort of takes me out of that. So it's very, yeah, it depends. Um, and yes, like Bernie Sanders is not universally protected in all white spaces as a result of being Jewish. That is absolutely true. And it's also, one of those things where a lot of the time these discussions are really hampered by the use of a lot of shorthand, right? Like if I just say like a cishet white guy, that usually conjures in most people's minds an image. And that image is only so useful as it is accurately describing what we're using it as shorthand for. But pretty much any individual is going to be an exception to that image, right? Like any particular cishet white guy that I could talk to, I mean, no, there will probably be some that are just like just just pure privilege, but um I mostly just think of like people who are really born rich and um yeah, Krillin, cishet white guy equals wasp. I really just am like, what comes to my head is like somebody who's in the House of Lords and Commons and like is part of the gentry and is considered like, up here, and they just got a ridiculous amount of like privilege. And that doesn't mean that they can't have shit problems, right? I mean, like, the British royal family will like have these like huge headline grabbing tragedies. Oh, we've lost Harry and Meghan. And it's like, did they die? No, they just became Americans. And like, it's like, okay, well, for the royal family's context, yeah, that sucks. Uh, but in the grand scheme of things, okay, sure. So anyway, setting this aside, I really want to just talk about like this particular thing because I do think that for some people, their body dysmorphia fundamentally comes down to fat phobia. But it is definitely not true that that is universal. I have had body dysmorphia around my eye shape. I have very small, hooded eyes with epicanthal folds, and I was teased a lot as a kid for it. People used to do the whole like pulling their eyes at me when I was a little kid. And I used to really like do the crazy lady eyes a lot, like just try to open my eyes as big as I could all the time to like make them look rounder because and I had a lot of body dysmorphia about it, and I used to like daydream about just like waking up with like different eyes and eyes that were like blue and that were like rounder in shape and like big, like they always talk about big pretty eyes, and it's like I actually have pretty small eyes. They're not like disproportionate to my face, like my whole face is pretty small, but they're not big, right? And I've had body dysmorphia related specifically, like I used to have these very particular fixations on uh, being afraid that I was going to wake up one day and my toes were going to have changed their length. And I would like be convinced I could feel them changing their length and that they were going to become like a hand and like they would be so long. And like I used to just look at my feet and feel sure that that was happening. Now, like this was when I was a teenager and I was having a whole host of issues and I was having a real time. And that had nothing to do with fat. Like me literally being like, I think I should like try to get toe surgery because I'm convinced my toes have turned into fingers and like aren't they abnormally long, and like feeling so convinced that there's something wrong with them had nothing to do with fat phobia. That is literally has nothing to do with fat phobia. Nothing. Nothing. It has more to do with like fear of like loss of myself and my autonomy, and also just like body horror and uh I don't know, maybe I watched like what was that MTV cartoon? Aeon Flux. Maybe I like saw that when I was a kid and I shouldn't have, because there's like some people who have like hands for feet and it like freaked me out. I don't know. Like there was body dysmorphia can have a ton of causes, right? And like there are times where yeah, I'll get it in my head sometimes that like some part of my body is wrong and I'll like obsess about it. And usually when that happens, like I need to just kind of get away from things that reinforce that idea, especially like I can't use things like Snapchat because Snapchat filters definitely trigger a lot of dysmorphia for me. Um, but yeah. And so, you know, one of the other things is that with a lot of online discourse, especially on social media, and I think especially difficult with things like Twitter, is you have a very limited number of characters. And even if you create like, 20 plus tweet thread, the point is really to try to create as snappy of an idea as possible to fit into a single tweet that will get as much engagement as possible. And so what that means is we can't have a lot of nuance. And it means that we need to really be very reductive in things and very much like we're going to focus in on one thing and we're going to try to universalize it. And yeah, exactly, Carlin. I still have that image of Aeon trapping that fly with her eyelashes stuck in my brain too. Like it literally freaks me out sometimes just thinking about it. And like when I was like in middle school, like I was genuinely like freaked out looking at my feet and like sure that my toes had become incredibly long and was just like I need to chop them off. They're just wrong. And like that's body dysmorphia, right? Like that was just me like just kind of being not very well mentally. And it had nothing to do with fat phobia. It was literally to do with like me being worried one of my toes was going to become incredibly long. So someone here, this at quasi underscore Alper makes a very good point, which is actually, you know, uh, probably not the best thing to start tweets with actually, but anyway, body dysmorphia in the DSM-5 specifically excludes body fat and weight issues since those are pretty much always under eating disorders. Criterion D, excuse the red marking. Are you going to claim having an eating disorder is fat phobic? And just to read the actual image, body dysmorphic disorder from the DSM, diagnostic criteria A, preoccupation with one or more perceived defects or flaws in physical appearance that are not observable or appear slight to others. B, at some point during the course of the disorder, the individual has performed repetitive behaviors, for example, mirror checking, excessive grooming, skin picking, reassurance seeking, or mental acts, for example, comparing his or her appearance with that of others in response to the appearance concerns. Like, this is literally what happened with me and my toes, where I'm just like, they're going to be too long. And I would like be convinced and I would need to constantly check. Okay. C, the preoccupation causes clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. I used to like be freaked out about, socks and shoes stuff. I mean, like, this was a very brief time in my childhood, but like, yeah. D, the appearance preoccupation is not better explained by concerns with body fat or weight in an individual whose symptoms meet diagnostic criteria for an eating disorder. Specify if, with muscle dysphoria, the individual is preoccupied with the idea that his or her body build is too small or insufficiently muscular. This specifier is used even if the individual is preoccupied with other body areas, which is often the case. Specify if, indicate degree of insight regarding body dysmorphic disorder beliefs. For example, I look ugly or I look deformed. With good or fair insight, the individual recognizes that the body dysmorphic disorder beliefs are generally or probably not true, or that they may not be true. That was definitely where I was like, this probably isn't true. There are other things where it's like, definitely not. Like, every once in a while, when I was like in high school, I used to like take pictures of myself and like dramatically Photoshop them. And then I would like email plastic surgery clinics and be like, can you fix my face in these ways? And I would just look like completely alien. And I would be like, sure that that's what my face should look like. And I was like really convinced that my face was wrong in all of these different ways that had a lot to do with like the ways in which I did not conform to Eurocentric beauty standards and the ways in which like I am mixed race and that ways that's manifested and the particular stresses that caused me. Because simultaneously, like, people would find me attractive, but a lot of people who found me attractive either found me attractive because they thought I looked like a child, or they could project some weird Orientalist, like, Asian fetish onto me and just be like, oh, if I squint my eyes hard enough, I can pretend you're Japanese. And that was also really fucked up and weird, right? Um, and so like there were things going on, but again, this had nothing to do with fat phobia. It had everything to do with like the particular stresses that can come from being mixed race and failure to sort of look enough like either group so as to not raise questions. Okay. So, with poor insight, the individual thinks that the body dysmorphic disorder beliefs are probably true, and with absent insight slash delusional beliefs, the individual is completely convinced that the body dysmorphic disorder beliefs are true. And then the person also says go after fat phobic systems rather than bullying individuals who are already distressed. And I would say that that is still true. Like, this person who made this original tweet, in their personal experiences of body dysmorphic disorder or dysmorphia in general may be fundamentally related to fat phobia that they have internalized. I cannot speak to that because they do not give us that information. But it's also true that that is not the universal characteristic, nor is that actually the diagnostic criteria. But this comes back to this idea that, like, if your experience of reality does not match mine, you are somehow being harmful. Right? So then there was a couple of others that were really interesting. I mean, there's also just the like whole problem with like transness. Like, are you going to say that people who are trans are somehow just fat phobic? And like this other person, Brian Chaos Gremlin, added a tweet that they had tweeted before. 99.9995% of eating disorders wouldn't exist if anti-fatness and fat phobia, sizeism, fat misia, fat hate wasn't a thing. There, I said it. And this is also not true. And there's a really particular example of eating disorders that I'm going to bring up in a second that has definitely nothing to do with fat phobia. But this other person, black_I, replied, this is not true. Eating disorders exist in cultures that do not value being thin or being low weight, and at a much greater rates than you describe. There's no culture where a fundamental human experience like eating doesn't have an emotional or psychological effect. This is absolutely true. Now, there is a particular phenomena of eating disorders where there were a number of cases in Ireland after the Great Famine where young girls refused to eat and starved themselves to death, but would claim that they did not need to eat because God was just keeping them alive. And some of these made big headlines and like became kind of famous. There's even the book that also has a movie based on it called The Wonder that's specifically about this. It's not looking at one particular person, but sort of amalgamation of a bunch of different stories. But there were cases in Ireland where even like the parents ended up getting charged with manslaughter because their child died of just starving themselves. But this was a particular thing that was like a religiously motivated experience of anorexia. Let me just, the fasting girls, let me just, religious anorexia. Let me just get you guys what the actual thing is. Here it is. So you can see here anorexia mirabilis, also known as holy anorexia, or colloquially as fasting girls, is an eating disorder similar to that of anorexia nervosa that was common in but not restricted to the Middle Ages in Europe, largely affecting Catholic nuns and religious women. Self-starvation was common among religious women as a way to imitate the suffering of Jesus and his torments during the Passion, as women were largely restricted to causing themselves voluntary pain by fasting, whereas holy men experienced suffering through physical punishment, voluntary poverty, and celibacy. So, like, this is an absolute counterpoint to that. And this is, again, the idea of, like, other people's contexts also do not matter in the discourse I'm trying to put forward. Other people's contexts, if you want to read more about this, there are lots of different reasons to have eating disorders. When I was having those body dysmorphia issues, I also had a lot of disordered eating, and it had nothing to do with fear of being fat. It was that I felt so little agency in my life And I also felt so much sort of like self-hatred that controlling my relationship to food gave me a sense of power and control over my life. And there were other things that I did that were equally not okay and not good for me that also gave me that, like being very rebellious, not doing homework, not going to classes, because I was like, this gives me power, and just write it all off and just say, like, this is only because of this thing. So, this is me partially responding specifically to this argument, but the point still comes back to this desire to like dunk on each other and to just be like, I have the most nuanced rhetoric possible. I have the most nuanced take, and I can completely obliterate all these other arguments. And also, you can't argue with me because I have the, positionality of authority here. And so, and this is also a point that I think is really important, specifically in this discussion, is that if someone else doesn't want to be fat, that is fine. It's also okay to want to be fat. You have a right to be fat if you want to, and there's nothing wrong with being fat. There's no moral worth to any food or any body weight, but that also includes people who do not want to be fat. That is their own sensory experience of their body. I've talked about before, there are weights where if I go below that weight or above a weight, I've got like a 10-pound, like 5 kilogram range where if I go above or below it, it starts to feel not good to me. If I go below it, I start to feel insubstantial, like I don't exist. I start to feel like I'm like, disappearing, and like that makes me really anxious. But if I go a lot above it, I also start to feel like negative somatic experiences as well that have nothing to do with my fear of being fat or like disgust at my body, because I still think I look good. I think when I look in the mirror, I still feel like I look good. It has more to do with like sensory experiences, clothing fitting tighter, not fitting as comfortably into certain types of things, not being able to sit in certain positions as comfortably because I don't have the room for it. And you know it's important to allow yeah, anyway, this is one example I wanted to talk about. The other one I wanted to come to, not this, that's just mine again. So this is Joshua Conkle tweeted, there's a weird cultural thing at play right now where some young people think they're progressives while actually being deeply conservative. And this is also coming back to some of that, which is like with the chili discourse. If you're not aware, there was a woman who cooked some chili for neighbors, and like people lost their shit about it. And there was like many tiers. So like the first tier was like transphobes who came after her because they thought she was trans, and they started saying like she was creepy and a predator and was like trying to prey on these like young men that she cooked for. And then when people realized she wasn't trans, the next one was like feminists who were saying like, oh, you cooking for these young men, you're like holding women back. And then consent came into the discussion, and then ableism. And it fundamentally came down to this idea of like a very, very, very Western capitalist, ultra individualistic expression of this idea, like if we're not all complete and absolute isolated island of individuals, then like this is tyranny. And yeah, there's just a lot wrong with it. But it's again coming back to this idea, like if you don't consider a lot of the tweets sort of decrying it as ableist, we're trying to say like, what if this and what if that and what if this, and like these things happen. But again, consent is not about perfect pre-planning or mind reading. It's you act from default frameworks, and then you update the framework as you get new information and as you build a relationship with the person. It's very normal in a lot of the world to bring a new neighbor food. And I tried to argue, kind of using the, verbiage that appeals to people on Consent Academy's Twitter, that like saying that making food for your neighbor was inherently wrong for X, Y, and Z ways is also like culturally imperialistic, because it's saying there's only one right way to do culture, and anything outside of my cultural framework is inherently wrong, is cultural imperialism. Like it is. But like also the point I was trying to make with saying that was to show we can always kind of take this further. We can always take it, there are more one-ups that we can get on each other ad nauseum, and then just, it's just, we're not gonna win. And like the conversation is kind of pointless at that point. And which is tough because like Reddit was a place that I think for a long time was really nice for discourse, right? It really, really helped me sharpen certain ideas and like connect and find other people and like learn about things. And there's always been bullshit in discourse. I don't want to say it's just a new phenomena, like, no. And as I've talked about beforehand on previous episodes, like, it's important for there to be plurality of methodology, of things like activism, but also of experience. And it gets into dangerous territory real quick. And it's one of the ones that is on this thread is like at Butch Glamour Puss retweeted or replied, so far I've collected kink is freakish abuse. No woman wants sex out of committed monogamy, and men should pay for dates and financially support their girlfriends. What am I forgetting besides a bunch of racism discourse that's just racism again, but that's evergreen? And some people were tweeting, have recently had discourse saying that like, oh yeah, here it is. The concept of safe word scares me because why doesn't no or stop suffice? And you want me to believe BDSM doesn't revolve around rape culture? Also just a kind of bad take. Safe words exist for a number of reasons. One of them being that intensity makes consent riskier. The more of an intense situation you and I are in, and having sex with someone, even very vanilla, very like kind and gentle sex, is still very intense. It can make it harder for people to necessarily process all the other sensory information coming in. So hearing someone say no or stop does not always completely communicate. Simultaneously, people can feel afraid to say those words. But if you get a safe word like hippopotamus or banana or pineapple, like those are things you're unlikely to say during sex. And because of their novelty, because of the surprise, are more likely to get through sensory, overwhelm or fixation to communicate to someone, I'm saying stop and I really mean it. Aradin, you said, sounds more like outrage for the sake of outrage. I agree. And also, to me, Reddit has always been the sewer of the internet. And then Krellin, you said, sewers are super important and are arguably the greatest invention in human history. Yeah, I'm a huge sewer fan. If you ever go to Paris, the museum I actually recommend the most is not the Louvre, which is just full of stolen shit, and some good art, yeah, also, but a lot of stolen shit. It is the Sewer Museum because it is fascinating. So anyway, I want to keep talking about this while I play some game. I wanted to talk about a couple of other things real quick, like related to, eating disorders and fat phobia. So there's this point that I want to bring up here. I've mentioned this before. So we have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. They are both parts of the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system functions to regulate the body's unconscious actions. The sympathetic nervous system's primary process is to stimulate the body's fight or flight response. It is, however, constantly active at a basic level to maintain homeostasis. The sympathetic nervous system, described as being antagonistic to the parasympathetic nervous system, which stimulates the body to feed and breed, and then rest and digest. So the point here is when you are anxious or stressed, it is very common for, your body to know I have some tools. I've been in this state of fight or flight, this state of hyperarousal for too long. There are tools that I can use to bring me back towards homeostasis because generally speaking, we're seeking homeostasis. And ways you can do that are things like eating food. So a lot of binge eating can have to do with things like being stressed or bored or understimulated. And, I've had plenty of times where I have done that and it was not good for me because I was just having a hard time with my mental health. And I was like, I can change even temporarily this feeling that I'm having of my nervous system being all like aroused and like engaged. And I don't mean aroused in the sexual sense, I mean like energized through eating, but also through masturbating. There's a reason why a lot of times when people are depressed, stressed out, understimulated, how do I want to say this? It's not surprising to me that there's the archetype of the like 20-something-year-old guy who's broke and depressed and lives at home with his parents and has no future currently or feels that he has no future, who spends all day eating junk food, playing video games, and masturbating. Because that is constantly basically, that is a person who's stuck in a loop trying to keep their nervous system at homeostasis. Because if they don't, they're going to go right back into their fight or flight response because they are panicked about what is happening with their life. And because they feel they have no power, they feel that they are trapped, and that's a very reasonable thing. So there are plenty of things where, a person might have an eating disorder that has nothing to do with fat phobia and everything to do with trying to maintain a sense of homeostasis in the nervous system. And if it can get out of control to the point that it becomes detrimental to functioning, and in general, you want to have multiple tools in your toolbox for processing and tolerating any kind of distress, and not just one, because if you don't have access to that one, like if I'm really stressed out and my go-to way of relieving stress is masturbation, I can't just like go do that at work. I mean, like I work from home, so like, yeah, I actually could, but I don't. But I would need other tools, right? Like I would need the ability to say like, I can do deep breathing. I can use temperature, like things that we talked about during our Surviving the Holidays chat a few Sundays ago. But if I get stuck in the loop of the only tools I have to are binge eating and masturbation, it's going to be really difficult because a lot of the time in life, those things are not available to you. So this is kind of bringing it to, I really wanted to push back against these particular pieces of discourse because I think that there were some not so great ideas in there, but also just kind of talk generally about this push to have ever more moral purity, but also ever more nuanced insight, and just to be the most nuanced, most like, I've considered every possibility, galaxy brain about social justice issues. But one of the things that it comes back to is there are also times where the different needs or aims of different marginalized groups of people may be in slight contradiction to each other. And that doesn't mean either one is wrong or bad. It means that there's not going to be one solution for everything, right? It doesn't mean that like we can't both get liberation. It means that what is going to help us get liberation in some ways is always going to be tied together because it's all connected, but in other ways there may be things that are not that compatible with each other, and we need to allow for that diversity to happen. Okay, I was going to talk about some other stuff related to like last mile transport and everything, but I just wanted to give you a little video instead so you can see an example. Here is a type of delivery bicycle. It's four-wheel one. It's probably got electric assist. It's an Amazon delivery cart. This can definitely carry a ton of packages. This can deal with last mile shipping. so that it does not need to be big vans or semi trucks or anything like that. It can use bike lanes. This is just another option. I'm going to put this in the chat if you all want this. Okay, let's get to some Stardew Valley. I thank you all for listening to this. I feel like this is one of my more impassioned discussions that I've had in a little while about anything with you all, because I think that there's a lot to say about it. I do also want to stress that, like, I am definitely not perfect. My analysis of any given social issue is not going to be perfect. But I say this not to say that, like, I should be so careful. Like, I should be careful. Yes, it is important to always try to be careful, especially with, like, whatever someone is normalizing. But also to just say that, like, it is an impossible game to try to be perfect in your analysis of everything and to consider all possibilities for all humans all the time. And in encouraging people to do that actually defangs and declaws a lot of these efforts. Let's see, did this work out okay? I think maybe, let me double check. Yeah, it's cut off. Give me a second, I'm gonna. Perfect, all right. We're gonna load, we're gonna play some game. My steel hoe is ready. All right, let's see what the fortune teller has for me. Good humor. Weather report. What's gonna be? Clear and sunny. Living off the land. What do you got to say? I know it's hard, but stop worrying so much about your horse. You can leave them anywhere and they'll make their way back home. Nice. What do I got in my inventory? Okay. I want to go to the skull mines, but I don't think it's going to be the thing that makes the most sense this morning. Dear Farmer Ariel, I'd like to give my wife a star fruit for our anniversary. Are you growing any on your farm? If you brought me one, I'd be very grateful. Heck yeah, I can do that for you, Kent. I think that the greenhouse is also restored. I do always want to go to the mines, Krellin. It's because they're, like, adventurous. And I like the surprise element, right? Where you don't know what you're going to get. I'm very novelty seeking. So yeah, coming back to it, I'm really just trying to stress that this is an important aspect of consent, which is that if we expect every person to have the same experience of reality than us, we're probably not going to practice consent very well, because we're going to not take time to consider that what is pleasurable or validating or feels good to me might be not pleasurable or invalidating or feel bad to someone else. And the reality is, it's okay for someone to have a different experience of reality than us. Fundamentally, it is okay for someone to have a different experience of reality with us. This is one of those things that really needs to be stressed. Okay, yeah, the sheep doesn't produce milk. That's fair. All right, do I have anybody else to milk? I feel like did I miss this cow? Did I get you? Yep. Oh, I'm facing the wrong way. Okay. All right, I think I got them all. So yeah, if we want to be good at practicing consent, we need to start from the understanding that other people have different experiences than us, and there's nothing wrong with that. It is just the truth, and they are not bad for having a different experience than us. Now, it can be true that, like with some of the discourse around the chili, if somebody experiences their neighbor coming and making them food and offering it to them as no worries, oh, okay. You're back in front of your computer. I thought you were saying you will be right back, Ron. If someone is saying like my neighbor bringing me food unprompted would make me feel really uncomfortable, that's sure. Yeah, it can make you feel uncomfortable. That's totally fine. That doesn't mean that it is universally like a horrible thing to do to bring someone food or something nice unprompted, right? It just means that for this person, it makes them really uncomfortable. That's okay. I mean, like, really, that's okay. It's definitely okay to have different wants and needs and desires than somebody else. I'm gonna go give some gifts today. I'm just looking at what people like. Um, Shane likes hot peppers, as does the mayor. I know that Gus likes oranges. Oh, Pam likes cactus fruit. I didn't realize that. All right. I think we're good. All right, I'm not going to put other things that don't belong in there simply because I can. So, you know, if we don't allow for other people to have different experiences of reality than us, we're just, then consent's not possible, right? Good, valid consent. Because it's also completely true that you and I, we can have an interaction with each other and we can have completely different experiences of the same interaction and neither of us be wrong. So, what do I mean by that? Well, for me, something might feel very consensual. I might think that this thing we did together was super good consent. It's totally on the up and up. I'm sure some people like tulips, so I'm going to bring those. And it's great and I loved it. But for you, you might say, hey, I thought I was going to like this thing. And it turns out it was really not great for me. And that doesn't mean either of us are bad. So if if somebody comes and gives you food, their neighbor offers to cook for you or they bring you something and it doesn't feel good to you, you can just tell them that. You can just say, "Hey, thanks but no thanks. I don't like it when strangers bring me food." It's the same with like offering homeless people food, right? A lot of times people are like, "Yeah, I want to go like feed the homeless. I'm going to, go and individually make a bunch of stuff and then serve it to them." Well, for some homeless people, that's no. That's weird. They're not going to trust stuff from a stranger. Look at this. The greenhouse is here. This is very exciting. Very exciting. Thank you to Tibron for like reminding me that Elliot likes duck feathers. So, so you just tell your neighbor, "Hey, this was not great. I didn't like this." And they update their consent framework. It's fine, right? It's fine. You just tell them, "No, thank you. This did not make me feel good." And then the consent framework is updated and they don't do it again. And if they do it again, then it becomes a problem, right? Like maybe they forgot, but also maybe they just didn't respect it or hear you the first time, or they don't see it as like legit. All reasons to have a discussion with them or set a boundary. Plenty of reasons to be like, okay, they didn't get it the first time. I feel nervous telling them again. Also legit, like that's fine. But it's not to say that there's only one way to experience that, right? So it could be, right, that I also want to say this, like people often sort of go straight to the idea, like, what if I'm afraid to say no to people? Yes, I gave Pam the cactus fruit. Hey, now that's really something that makes a million kid. Oh, you've got a hangover, I bet. So that's gonna be true. And for a lot of people who were brought up to be people pleasers and who were not really allowed to set boundaries growing up, that's rough. That's difficult. But that is not the other person's fault. And this is not to victim blame because you are a victim, but where you are the victim, like It is a form of exercise, yes, carrying around the battery pack. Um, the situation that caused any sort of victimization was not, your neighbor bringing you food. It was the situations that taught you you're not allowed to set boundaries. Elliot says, Ariel, this is a beautiful gift. Thank you. A gentle little sunbeam woke me up this morning. I never felt so refreshed. I'm sorry if that isn't very interesting to you. It's pretty cute, dude. All right. Yes. Yes. Shh, don't let Jody see. Ah, this looks juicy. She'll love it so much. Thank you. Hello, farmer. I've been gone so long, I feel like a stranger. I know that little kid likes grapes. Well, thank you so much. This is terrific. Glad Dad's back, but he's different than I remember. Oh, what is this aquatic research quest? Pufferfish. Will I ever get a pufferfish? Who knows? So, like, if you are not comfortable setting boundaries, this is not to say that you are bad or wrong, but it's something where you're going to have to learn how to set boundaries. You're going to have to practice it. And like maybe you never get to the point where you're capable of doing that. Maybe you never have the resources. Okay, Gus gave him an orange. You're giving this to me. I'm speechless. Good evening. Can I get you anything? So, what's kind of ironic is talking about this chili situation and then like literally pancakes. I'm gonna get a coffee to bring to Harvey. Just playing the game, like going around and giving people a bunch of gifts, right? But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't want a world where people are like afraid to interact with each other and to like reach out to their neighbors and establish boundaries and connections. And I feel like if we looked at any of these people who were saying, "Oh, this is so terrible," and I then said, "Okay, imagine your, Muslim immigrant refugee neighbors like want to offer you something that's very traditional from, the country that they come from and they come by to introduce themselves. Are you going to assume that they're horrible, ableist, violent? Like really? You're going to go that place? Probably not. But if you paint yourself into this rhetorical sort of corner where you create these really absolutist statements about like this is inherently wrong to do and if you do it you are evil, people will end up also, I feel, arguing against things they actually believe because they have painted themselves into an intellectual corner, right? I think that people will get into a place where they feel like, okay, I have said I believe this thing, even though I don't really, I now have no choice but to sort of continue along with what I have said. And that gets rough real fast. And it's not a great place to be in for people. Do y'all get what I'm trying to say? Like, does this make sense? Where is the mayor? I need to give the mayor a chili. You standing up here? No. All right. Maybe they'll be in the shop tonight. I'm gonna go get my hoe. All right, and you said, yeah, the whole chili thing to me is the essential. I want to be outraged about something, and this is popular right now, so I'm going to find a reason to be outraged. Yeah. What? I literally missed getting it by 10 minutes. No. Difficult. Difficult, difficult, lemon difficult. Bummer. All right, let me see. Is Shane working in Georgia right now? So I can give him a chili because he likes chilies too. Yeah, Shane. You're like so cute in your uniform. Wow, Ariel, how'd you know this is my favorite? Shane's hard at work. I don't think you can even talk to this person. I've never bought anything from Joja Mart before. I never will either. Not doing it. Oh, there's the mayor. I'm coming for you, dude. Hot pepper. Wow, this is my favorite. Thank you. If you want to play a cruel joke on Marnie, give her clay. She might not forgive you, though. Wow. People dislike very reasonable things to dislike in this game, and it's kind of funny. It's like, yeah, why in the world would I give you clay? Anyway, it still is just coming back to this whole central idea I'm trying to communicate, which is that, like, people are going to have different experiences of reality, and we need to make room for that. And I'm by no means trying to say, like, if you don't have this one experience of reality, you are bad or wrong. It's literally the opposite of what I'm wanting to say. Because I think if you experience, your neighbors offering you food as stressful and creepy and like, because of your neurodivergence, you feel really upset because you didn't remember or you haven't memorized like an exact script for how to react to somebody who does this, and you're not sure you can control your facial expressions and stuff. Yeah, that's legit. And it makes sense. And also, I would want to inquire about like, do you have the resources then to manage everyday life, or do you need other kinds of help? Like, if something as simple as your neighbor coming over to you to offer cookies puts you into this state, you know, this is not me trying to like be snarky. I would say, like, then everyday life must be quite difficult for you. Do you have the resources you need, or is there other help? Now, there was one tweet on the chili thing that was basically like, imagine having all this difficulty and someone comes and brings you food you didn't want when what you really need was a dog walker. It's like, how are they supposed to know that? Right? If they're a stranger and they're literally just trying to, create a relationship with you through something like giving you food, how are they supposed to know that what would be better for you is this other thing? Now, you can it's also a little weird, I think, to expect your neighbors to just like do all these things for you and to know all of this stuff, but like that's setting that aside. I would also say that, like, especially if you don't have a relationship with them, um, you got to ask for things. Again, this to me was like getting into this idea of like wanting people to be able to read your mind, which isn't going to be possible, first of all. Okay, Jody likes pumpkin or pancakes. Let me go give Jody some pancakes. I might not be able to make it on time. I think her house closes at 8. Um, oh, I did. I made it in the house. Let me give Jody some pancakes. Oh, you're such a sweetheart. I really love this. Summer is nice, but it also means more work. How many hearts do I got? 2. All right, Aran, you said maybe she has some trauma around pottery, so you shouldn't make fun of that, especially as mayor. Yeah, yeah, that's true. Aran, I also imagine that a lot of people that are outraged, if it actually happened to them, would probably appreciate it. See, that to me is pure entitlement. It is like complaining that someone gave you a book as a gift, but then saying you were offended because what you really wanted was an Xbox. So, there is one other layer of like nuance to add to this whole gift giving kindness thing conversation. There are ways in which gift giving can be manipulation. And there is a whole sort of like cultural analysis practice of just like gift giving in Japan and Japanese gift giving practices as like social control and social norm reinforcement. And there can also be ways in which, like, I remember as a teenager, my dad, for example, one year for my birthday, got me a gift certificate to Banana Republic when I was just like, oh, I got a thing with Willie. All right. Hi, Ariel. It's odd. I'm not sure what caused the boulder to disappear. The stream is flowing from deep within the mountain. Hey, do you see that glistening in the water? Yes, that's quality ore. The flow of water must be carrying it out of the mountain. You know what this means, right? It means we can start panning for ore. Here, I've got an extra pan in my backpack. Why don't you take it? If you ever see ore glistening in the water, use that pan and see what you find. I received a copper pan. Nice, nice. Okay, I'm gonna pause it while I make some more tea for myself, or just put some more stuff in my cup. I think as my dad probably looking back, I judge my parents so much less than I did when I was a kid. Just one of the things that happens as you get older is you kind of like recontextualize the experiences you had as a child, and like people often sort of humanize their parents more. I got the bucket on my head. Nice. But as a teenager, I felt, and even in college, I felt like this was like clear him trying to control me. Like him trying to send a message, I'm going to buy you a banana. Like, I was like a goth. And the thing is, in the end, it was completely fine because I got a bunch of like nice black velvet clothing from Banana Republic. And I got to still be plenty goth. And it was just like slightly nicer goth clothing, right? But as a kid, I felt very much like this was an attack on who I was as a person, and then my dad was trying to send a message about like, you're too old to be dressing like a goth. I expect you to change in these ways, yada yada. Do I actually think my dad had that intention? No. My dad is not that sort of conniving. I thought he was when I was a kid, but I was an angry teenager. For the most part, as I've gotten older, I've come to realize like my parents just had completely untreated ADHD my entire childhood. My mom didn't get diagnosed until much later. My dad was diagnosed as a kid and was treated really bad because of it and really judged and was just like put on Ritalin and then nothing. And then he blames Ritalin for why he's only 5'7" and all this other stuff. And like, it was kind of a trauma for him as well. And so my parents as adults, they got married when they were in their late teens. They were in their really early 20s when they had me, like 21 and 22. And so they were kids still, basically, with untreated ADHD. And so a lot of the things that I took as manipulation or like intentional sort of difficulties, now being in more of an adult, I'm like, okay, yeah, it was just this is what happens when you have completely untreated, unmanaged ADHD. Setting that aside, at the time, I very much felt like this gift was a type of manipulation or control. And it is true that it can be. This is what I'm trying to say is like when we make these absolute statements, I don't think it's very helpful. And it's more about like, do we actually want to have a consensual relationship with the person? Are we going to update our frameworks when we make a mistake? And does everybody communicate openly and honestly? The other thing is like, some of the discourse I saw where people were saying like, I would just be so afraid of a neighbor that would come and do this thing. And I still come back a little bit to the whole idea of like treating your neighbors as a threat and how problematic that can get really, really quickly. And again, this is me kind of, using the same kinds of way of taking the discourse to sort of defang their own arguments, but it's more me trying to say, like, don't paint yourself into this intellectual corner, because the very tools you're using to do that, to claim your righteousness, can be turned against you. But I do also think it's true that, like, if you absolutely would say any neighbor coming to ever give me anything nice or show me any kindness would be like terrifying and they must be this or that, I would say, like, okay, then you're going to get into a lot of prejudice pretty quickly, and like probably a lot of racism. Even if that is not your intent, that's still the impact, that's still like the sort of emergent character. Okay. But the other thing is, constantly viewing the whole world as a threat around you is, one, not the fault of the person who's doing it, or who you're responding to that way. There are ways in which we should be aware. I know academic Foxhole has talked many times about how, like, since transitioning, now he walks in the world as a Black man. He will often, if he's walking down the street, especially at night, and is like heading toward or passing towards some women, will choose to cross the street so as not to make them afraid. And it doesn't matter that, like, he shouldn't have to do that. I'm not gonna have time to deal with all this. Just go to sleep and do it in the morning. But it's also awareness of context, right? Like, if I am a man, especially a man who's much larger, than a woman I'm interacting with, and we're alone, I'm going to try my best to be aware of even just my physicality. Similarly, like, if I'm someone's boss, even though I am very small and I am female and I am, like, whatever, non-threatening, I still am going to be careful to make sure that I'm careful with my statements. I've also said this with, like, being the co-director of the Consent Academy. People view me as having this, like, kind of extreme moral authority when it comes to consent. They're going to hold me to a much higher standard, even though I'm just a human being. But they're also going to view a lot of the things I do and say as official Consent Academy positions, even when it doesn't make any sense. Even when it's just like, I'm just shooting the shit. This was something I just thought off the top of my head. This has nothing to do with, like, how I feel in some sort of big long-term manner, whatever. You know what? Like, it doesn't even matter that it's not something I feel in some big long-term manner, because people are still going to expect that what I say is stuff that I actually believe. And they're going to say, well, if she's at the helm of this institution, that must mean that this is, like, official position. So I have to be a lot more careful. Or if, like, I want to argue with someone online, like someone makes a post on social media and I don't like it and I want to tell them that their idea is stupid or whatever, like, I have to be really aware of the fact that, like, I'm gonna be seen as holding a lot more power. And I do hold a lot more power in some ways, because you don't get to run this kind of organization without having some sort of qualifications or reason for being put in charge of it, generally speaking. And so people are going to take what I have to say with a lot of weight. So this is all coming back to the point of, like, I need to be very, very careful about the things I do and say online. And this is me just having pure risk awareness, right? Of, like, what is the risks and what are the power differentials here? So this is to say, like, if I'm a man and I'm interacting with women, I'm being trauma informed, which is assuming a person is more likely to have a history of trauma than not. And I understand that most trauma is sexual trauma. I am going to be mindful of that. And I'm going to do my best to make sure that the people I'm interacting with know that they can say no to me, and that I will respond in a safe way to that no, right? Like, I will respect that no. Like, that's part of being trustworthy, is not just assuming because I know my intentions are good, I'm therefore deserving of trust. It's proving to people that you are worthy of the trust you're asking for. I've mentioned this like a million times, I know, but it's one of those things that really bears repeating. Um, and so this comes down to like it's not an all or nothing thing. It's not me saying that like, if you are, a big intimidating dude and you're approaching, like a single woman who's just moved into the neighborhood and doesn't know anybody, that you shouldn't be mindful of the fact that like she might be kind of afraid of you. It's but it's also saying that like we all have a responsibility to heal our own trauma. So this is one of the things when we talk about like harm creates responsibilities. Everybody involved in a situation where harm has happened has a responsibility, and the responsibilities are going to be different. And the person who experienced harm, their responsibility is to their own healing. That is the only responsibility that they have in that situation, but it is fundamentally still their responsibility to heal. And they can get support for it. They can be given time. They can be given space, whatever they need. Accommodations can be made. But when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, it is still, oh, yeah, I actually want to take that with me. Fundamentally, their responsibility to heal. Okay, so why am I talking about this? Because if I'm carrying a lot of trauma from, these bad experiences I've had, it's not okay for me to just treat every single dude I ever meet as though he's a sexual predator, because that's harmful. And yes, like it's, because I'm not trying to be absolutist about this as well, because there's reasons to be suspicious, right? There's reasons to say, I'm not going to trust you until you show me you're worthy of trust. Totally legit. But also, like, it is good to work on this trauma. There are ways in which it is a very accurate response to reality, and it is actually like, it's not trauma brain, it's just like accurately assessing risks and what's happening around you in reality. I'm not trying to gaslight anybody, but I'm trying to say that like all of these things can be true at the same time. All of these things can be true at the same time, and they don't negate each other. I'm trying very hard to really be very nuanced here. Ever more nuance. I'm playing the game, right? But no, I'm actually just trying to be, thoughtful and careful with my words. I feel like I have one more cow that I didn't milk. Can't find it though. I really must. Oh no, I have 2 cows and I have a goat, and the goat didn't have any milk today, I think. I have 3 cows. I have 3 cows. There we go. There we go. So, you know, if I've got trauma, I should be working on healing that trauma as much as possible. It's really important that I do that. And I may need support to do that. I might not have the resources to do that as soon as I would like to. And if I lose my shit on somebody because I'm having a trauma response, that does not mean that it's okay for me to mistreat that person because I have trauma. And I would still need to take accountability for losing my shit on somebody who did not deserve me to lose my shit on them, right? I would still need to try to make amends. I would still need to sort of take ownership of potentially causing harm to that person who feels, unsafe around me because I can fly off the handle because if I get stressed or something, right? So it's all kind of like all of these different things can be true simultaneously and not contradict or negate each other. And yes, maybe, your neighbor coming and offering you food would be annoying and you would hate it. It's like the whole thing with like fruitcake, everybody brings fruitcake to the new neighbors and nobody really seems to like fruitcake, but it's like tradition. I mean, somebody out there's got to like fruitcake for it to become such a standard sort of tradition, and like I'm pretty sure I've had fruitcake and it was good. I feel like Panettone Christmas holiday cakes are basically a fruit cake and they're delicious. But anyway, it's. I need to take a drink. Aradin, yes. I am wearing the pan as a hat. It's nice because then it doesn't have to take up space in my inventory, but then I can have it with me at all times. Aradin, you said, it is the story of the hockey sweater. I don't know if that is known story outside of Canada. I don't know the story of the hockey sweater, so I would love it if you could share it. You also said, I imagine that for most women, if they are out at night, they are going to view all men as dangerous until proven otherwise, and they are the ones that decide when it is proven. And it is a person by person. Yeah, this is also absolutely true. And Aradin, you also said, I am a weak person, and most people could easily beat me up if they wanted. All right, let's process some geodes. Let's see what we get. Nice. Got some clay. Rocks. Something pretty. What was that? Slate? Nice. Oh yeah. Clay. Nice. These are nice. I like getting all these things. I like the little twinkly sounds. Ooh, fairy stone. I don't think I've ever gotten that before. Wow. This is a Jasper. Jasper is, I think, a beautiful name. It says the coal is like a sad thing to get, but honestly, I'm pretty jazzed to get coal. I need so much more coal. Having this bigger backpack is really, really nice. So yeah, coming back to the main idea at hand, it's really just two people can have completely different experiences of the same thing and both can be valid. I can be doing something that is completely culturally acceptable, completely innocuous, and very, very normal, like baking cookies for my neighbor. And my neighbor can view it as some kind of attack and they can feel harmed. Now, I don't have to validate that it is an attack, but I can say, I am sorry I made you feel attacked, right? I made you feel attacked. I'm sorry I made you feel attacked. And, it's not okay. And I will update my consent framework for my interactions with you and will not bring you cookies again in the future. Can you forgive me? Perfectly fine. That's often all that's needed. And for so many consent incidents, they would not become violations if people simply talked about them. Because a lot of the time, a consent incident damages a relationship, right? And by talking about what's happening, that relationship can be restored. Can I sell these things? Yeah, let's sell all this stuff. Sweet. Sweet. All right, and you say the story of the hockey sweater is a children's book here about how a child wants a hockey jersey of a very well-known, whose name is escaping me, player on the Montreal Canadiens, and so asks for it, and his grandma gets him instead the Maple Leaf sweater, and how he feels so ashamed about the sweater, he hopes moths eat the sweater. That feels like a very human story. All right, I want to get, since I have the, How long does cabbage take to grow? 9 days. Poppy seeds. What do I want to grow? Blueberry seeds, 13 days. I'm going to get some of these for the thingamabobber. 12 days. If I plant them today, they should be good. Okay. I'm just gonna get a ton of these because I want to grow them in my greenhouse. I'm gonna say hi to peeps. I do all the grocery shopping here. Yes, nice, Lewis. How's it going, Abigail? The air is so thick with honey and nectar all summer. I almost feel dizzy. All right, Pierre, let's be friends. Sometimes I get new items in stock. Make sure to stop by every so often. Oh, right. I can start to plant trees. Oh, yeah. Can I do them all in one go? I think so. Let me try to get one of each all in one go. Oh, no, I need the apple one still. Okay. That was a lot. Trees are expensive, yes. Yeah, Aradin, that story feels very human. Like it feels very much like what a little kid would experience, and the ways in which you might feel a lot of guilt for not appreciating a gift. And we need to have better ways to talk about it. And I think one of the difficulties we can get ourselves into is we can really have this idea that if you didn't perfectly know what gift a person was going to want, that means your like relationship with that person is fake and you should feel bad. And a lot of the time it's like it's not possible to predict everything and people make mistakes and like they think they're buying the thing someone wants and like I remember as a little kid one year it was Christmas and I was getting Barbies and like these two little girls I was friends with were also going to get the same Barbies. And like our parents had, coordinated to try to make it so we would get all the like Aladdin Barbies, but there was an accident where like they accidentally were going to make it so we were going to have like two of the same one. So then there was like this phone call to like figure out something last minute changes. Basically the point I'm trying to make is that like you can have ways to talk about these things that are not necessarily so guilt-ridden, but it requires people being comfortable with saying, hey, thank you so much, I really appreciate this, and I have no use for this thing you've given me. Right. And this is also one of those things where it's like, if you were the kind of person who's like really stressed about setting boundaries because you grew up in a household where like setting boundaries was dangerous and you were never allowed to, like, that's legit. That for sure happens. There are people where that's definitely the experience they've had of their lives. And they got to work on it. They got to practice setting boundaries with people because they can't never set boundaries with anybody and expect everybody to just read their mind about everything to do with consent with them and then get upset when things aren't perfect. There are things that are going to be obviously not consensual. There are things where it's like people really need to, the onus is really on the person doing the thing to make sure the consent is really good and to really check in. And there are also limitations. If a person is really withholding the information, if it's not something that is like obviously not consensual, there are things where like if there is doubt, you need to stop. Like with a lot of sexual situations, if you have doubt about whether or not this person is really consenting to what you're doing together, you should stop. Like you should just not proceed forward because the risk is too high, right? The risk of causing really serious harm of really hurting somebody, it's all way too high, and you should just, say, hey, let's save it for another time, or let's just do this other thing instead. It doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean the situation is ruined forever. It just means you got to be careful, because there are some things where, like I said, the risk of harm is just so great that it's really, really, really important to be really sure that everybody is okay with what is happening. And to a certain extent, it'll never be perfect. It'll never be possible to be 100% sure. And you always have to also ask yourself, like, am I comfortable with the risk of what could happen if I get this wrong? Right? That's a perfectly fair question to ask oneself. And if the answer is no, then again, just don't proceed. Let's see here. Got so much work to do on this farm. Hi, Davange. Welcome. So yeah, it's all pretty complicated. Online discourse, it's rough. I do think it rots people's brains. Because I think it gets back to that thing we've been talking about, which is that it really pushes people to have these very all or nothing absolute statements, to have the greatest moral authority, to be like the person who's above reproach, which is really nobody ever. Like, everybody can always be called on their bullshit, and everybody's capable of bullshit. Like, really, this is important for us to remember, is that, like, there is no identity that is going to give you absolute authority on everything ever. There is no like amount of marginalization that will make it, or experience even, right? Like, you can be the world's leading expert in something and still be wrong about things, and still make mistakes. You can be literally like a person who invented something and still be wrong about things. Like, it's possible. And if to pretend otherwise is to really just be silly. And yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this like race to the bottom. Okay, put some things away. I'm really hoping to go to the mines at least once. I can't believe I got so many prismatic shards the last time. That was pretty exciting. Y'all, that was like really exciting. Thinking back on it, I'm just still like, yeah, that was cool. I didn't run into Harvey to give him this thing. All right, it's only 9:40. Dave Bonchu said, I was at a test center on Sunday. It was one of my biggest exams, and there was security and checking process was nasty and something I didn't want to consent to, but had to take the exam as I paid for it. I did not get my new sword yet, Rodden. That's rough. I think it's really rough when there's like, I imagine this was like as an anti-cheating thing. I could be wrong. Like, it could have been like there was some worry about violence or something, but my assumption is like that amount of scrutiny was related to wanting to prevent cheating of some kind. And, surveillance is not often the solution to these problems. And people being afraid of someone cheating, it's like in real life, you generally do have access to anti-thieves, yeah. Yeah, I mean, exactly, Aaron. It's security theater. And like a lot of the time, these things don't actually fix the problem. All right. I'll go dig in that place sometime. Secret note. My level 10 in fishing hit. I feel like I've done so much fishing this round. I need to check it out. Um, Farming and fishing. Yes. Um, Combat, I am level 7. Foraging, or no, 8. Foraging 8, mining 9. Almost level 10 for everything. Yeah, I mean, having childhood trauma, Devansh, related to that is also just related to any of this, whether it's being like touched in those ways or just being like immediately assumed to be, some kind of thing. This also brings me to this other point that I was talking about, like these. Devansh, we've been talking about some internet discourse and like people trying to say that cooking food for your neighbors is like inherently wrong and you're like a bad person for doing it. Um, and my argument has been I don't agree. And we've been talking about consent there. And one of the arguments that people have been saying is like to say why it's wrong and bad is like, what if the person you're trying to offer food to has some kind of trauma around like strangers coming up to them and offering them things? And it's like, one, that's kind of hard to predict and it's not necessarily that reasonable to expect. But like any given person is more likely than not to have trauma, right? As I've mentioned even earlier today, that's part of being trauma informed. But it has to also extend to the people we often are going to assume are responsible for trauma, i.e., men. We have to be willing to let it be that. So we also consider that a lot of men have trauma, are more likely than not to have trauma. See, you did too, Ron. Enjoy the art show. All right, cream of sauce for one. Carp. I already know how to cook carp surprise. Fortune teller. Fairies, please no. Oh, so difficult. I got so many animals now. It's great. I want more. I did kind of like shoot myself in the foot a little bit by buying all those trees because I realized I was like trying to save up to get rabbits, but I just got hyped about trees. Impulsivity, man. Impulsivity. But yeah, this is also one of those things, and one of the things that we touched on when we were on a Sunday stream talking about the man who didn't want to be coerced into adopting his stepdaughters. His consent matters too, and his trauma related to things like daughters and children and divorce and everything matters too. And I think with security theater, we kind of leave security theater is not trauma informed at all. And like surveillance is not very consensual, nor is it very trauma informed. It's all kind of a big mess. And I'm sorry, Dave Anch, that you were put in the middle of that. Like, it's not okay that we've got this world that really just feels so comfortable with seeing surveillance as default. And like cheating is one of those things that's really difficult for me with how I feel about it because so often in real life when you're having to like do whatever job, you're actually gonna have resources and be able to look things up, and if you don't know something well enough to get it finished during the course of the exam, having cheating tools and like your book or whatever is actually not likely to help you. And so to me, a lot of the time, it really just makes sense to have tests that are open book because that's more like real life. All right. I make, oh, I don't have slime for the oil maker. That's too bad. I need pine tar. but I can make crystallarium. I'm definitely going to do that. And I can make some iridium sprinklers. I can make one. I am going to do that for the sake of what I can put into the greenhouse. Yes. Oh yeah, and I want to make a couple of seed makers. I did want to make a chest, but I guess I need more wood. Yeah. So many layers to all of this. Got to put some jade in here because then I can buy stairs to go down in the skull mine. Aradin, you said it really is all centered around but what if thoughts. Exactly. I mean, that's also one of the big things is like we've talked about how much a lot of what if thoughts can be really harmful to us, but they can also be harmful to each other. Okay, so 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. No, it should be right here, I think. That's where the sprinkler should go. That might be one too far over. 1, 2, 1, 1, 2. Yeah, right there. It was too far over. You know, people can have all kinds of trauma, and we often really forget about that when we create different systems. Or there's some people's trauma that we prioritize a lot more than others, that we see as more real than others. That especially when it comes to things like, say, sexual trauma, we don't take anybody's trauma that seriously. Like, I don't want to say that we always prioritize X person or never prioritize Y person, because when it comes down to it, we don't really prioritize anybody's trauma or boundaries. But we tend to, when we think about, for example, who experiences sexual trauma, we tend to have a pretty narrow view, and we tend to think of it as women. We tend to think about, when we think about sexual trauma, as thin, pretty, young, usually white women are the people we think of as sort of like the face of sexual trauma. And that's not very accurate because, it's not about any of that. And same thing with other types of like just body and touch trauma. It doesn't all have to be sexual to still be about, body and boundaries. If I don't feel safe with certain types of power dynamics or touch because of traumatic experiences I've had, that's still real. It doesn't necessarily have to even be, and this kind of comes back to the central thing we've been talking about is, are there options? Do people have other choices? Is there the opportunity to negotiate? There's a reason why, like, if somebody comes up and just like gives me food that I don't want, it's not the same thing as, this kind of security theater. It's, I don't want to say this. Kind of tired. It's nuanced. It's really what I'm trying to get at. It's complicated. It's not all one thing. It can change from day to day. Who with security theater stuff, we don't often have the actual ability to say no. We get some choice when it comes to things like airports. Sometimes we might be able to choose between, do we want to be, get the body scan, the radiation, or do we want the pat down, the groping? And like, is that really choice? I would argue that it's not exactly choice because you still can't really opt out of the examination, and you can't say like, but I want X kind of privacy. Um, all right, let me see. David, what did you say? Uh, reminds me of something else I came back on social media for a bit today after 15 to 16 days because one of my major exams was over, but my college exams are still running. And I am kink positive handle, and I got so many non-consensual DMs. Yeah, and one girl that I pointed out that it isn't okay and didn't consent to it, she was like, if you don't like these pictures, then you aren't a man. And I had to finally send her Sliber flashing laws. Okay, I agree with Aradin, and then I'm sorry you have to deal with that. And this is a really good example of like men's consent, especially men's sensual consent, is really often discounted, and it's not okay. It's just not okay. It's not okay to just say like because you're a dude, you're supposed to whatever when it comes to sex. Like no, you don't owe anybody that, and that's not okay for people to just say if you don't like these pictures, you're not a man, because like yeah, and you're right, Krellin. The way to opt out of those things is to simply not fly, but that's not always an option for everybody. Some people have jobs or life circumstances that require it. And also, like, it's still pretty shit. I'm going to put these in the chest inside my house. I feel like I've just been doing so much, like, tidying these last few days. All these, like, maintenance tasks on the farm. Oh my gosh, there is a duck over here. Look at that. That is cute. It is just on the water. I love it. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's not okay for somebody to just say, like, you have to look at these naked photos of me. And it also, I think, makes a lot of sense. We have a lot of non consensual practices in general, but I also think that there are a lot of women who feel very comfortable being very non-consensual towards men because they feel like, you know, all men are just super sexed up all the time, always want sex, and like I can just take. And they're all just gonna be like, you know, falling over themselves to get access to whatever. And that's really a shit ass way to think about men. And Rodden, you said asexual, so yeah, I don't fall into many of those. You are male, so you should enjoy this situations. Yeah, and like you don't even have to be asexual to not enjoy it, but like we have to not forget that asexual men exist and are not any kind of like aberration. I think there are many men who are asexual or demisexual or whatever, any combination. Other little wormies, gotta get them. So yeah, if your neighbor offers you food, which is totally normal and socially acceptable, and you can't eat it for whatever reason, you can just say so. And if they say, "Oh, I really just wanted to help you because it seems like you're having a rough time in life," you can say something simple to them like, "Thank you, I really appreciate that, and like it's so interesting that you noticed that. And what I really would need, this is what I really need, is that something you'd be interested in doing?" But again, like one of the things was someone was saying, like, what I really needed was a dog walker. And I'm like, well, if you don't know this person and half your complaint is that the person is a stranger and how dare they, are you really going to give a stranger your dog? Uh, that you didn't meet through like explicitly dog walking context or something. Like, I don't really buy that. But yeah. Yeah, I do also think that, Aradin, there are some people who feel like their non-consensual behavior towards men is okay because it's a kind of balancing the scales. And I think also there are things where if you are into kink, for example, people assume a lot about you and that like that must mean you want all sex all the time no matter the type. We also tend to assume that about men generally speaking, which is also ridiculous, but I think there's a double whammy that happens with people who enjoy kink, which is just really this assumption that if you are a kinky person, you must be this kind of way. And therefore, I'm allowed to just kind of do whatever I want to. It's dangerous. Yeah. Yeah. So, the difference though between like unsolicited nudes and giving your neighbor food, right? One is socially acceptable and pretty low risk, and one is socially unacceptable and pretty high risk. And while you might send an unsolicited nude to someone and they really like it, it is still an incredibly risky thing to do from a consent perspective. It is not something that I would typically uh, recommend somebody do. You know, I think it's way better to, have some kind of connection with the person. And then, you can be real sexy about it and ask, like, hey, do you want to see this? Like, you can start by like describing the situation that's going on and then waiting until the person requests, like, oh, I would love to see that, and then surprise them with pictures. Or if you've already established that you have that kind of relationship where you send pictures to each other, even then, you would still want to be careful, like, is it going to pop up on the person's phone and like there'll be a preview of it? Do you want other people to potentially see the photo, but also could it get them in trouble at work or, with their parents or wherever they are? Krellin, yes, Anthony Weiner should never send dick pics. Yeah, men with the name Weiner. I mean, a lot of the problem isn't dick pics. I mean, I've had plenty of long distance relationships. Definitely, it is definitely very normal to exchange nude photographs and sexy text messages and interactions with each other. And there's also ways in which it would be incredibly inappropriate. And, I was always really paranoid about like, what if I accidentally send this? Because, like, Charlie's name is Charles, and I have an uncle named Charles, and I was always like really paranoid about like what if I accidentally, click on the wrong email address or something. I would like triple check and whatnot because that would be pretty fucked up if I sent that to my uncle. He would definitely be very uncomfortable with that and would not appreciate it. And, I have a responsibility there, right? If I'm going to be doing that kind of activity, just like I have a responsibility not to flash somebody or, yeah, you know. So you can just simply update your consent framework. If you're unable to eat something, right? Like you've got some kind of allergy, it's okay to just say to your neighbor, hey, thanks, but no thanks. I have this allergy. Uh, Sebastian says, what's the point of going outside? I've seen it all. Okay, I'm gonna give you some sashimi, dude, because you're a cute weirdo, and I really love this. How did you know? Fuck yeah, dude. Of course I know. Hey, Citizen Shades. Oops, stopped paying attention. It's just in the middle of fishing, my brain was just like, what if we thought about something else? And then All right. Um, all right, and you said also it is the internet, so realize that if you send nudes, there's a chance that they could be made public. Yes, and I mean that would still be non-consensual, right? Like if there is, I can't consent to my, data being shared without my knowledge, right? And revenge porn, for example, where like you share, explicit images or video of somebody uh, without their consent publicly, especially for the sake of getting back at them if you feel they've hurt you in some way. Like, even if they did behave non consensually towards you, that doesn't mean you're allowed to go and behave non consensually back towards them. Uh, but, that kind of thing would be very, very non consensual. But a lot of people feel like it's normal. And this is I'm making some infographics for talking to your kids about consent, and I've got it from like generally, and then for like toddlers and early childhood, elementary school, middle school, early high school, late high school is what I've got so far, and they're going to be on our website probably next week if I finish them. But I'm definitely going to have to put in there like talking about nudes, which is understanding like, hey, your kids are probably going to do this, or there's a good chance they will. And so it's really important that you talk about consent related to that, but also the law, because kids do get convicted of sex crimes for sending nudes of themselves, but especially for sharing other people's nudes. I also need to put on there for the elementary school age is that like a lot of times parents think when people often think consent is just about sex, which is definitely not, but they often think that they don't have to talk about any of this until they're teenagers. Well, not knowing that for most people, first exposure to pornography is around 8 or 9 years old. And most of the time, it's not a very consensual experience. It is something that they, you know, were not prepared for. They stumble upon it, accidentally, or often an older child shows it to them. That's what it was with me. Is like I was friends with a girl who was a few years older than me, and I was like 8 years old, and she was like, "Oh, let me show you like my dad's secret magazines." And it wasn't a upsetting experience for me. I just kind of thought it was funny. And my mom had already had like sex talks with me, and so I kind of knew what was happening. So I wasn't, but because my mom had already talked to me about these things, because I already had some understanding, it helped me process what I was experiencing in the moment. So it made it less likely to be traumatic. But for a lot of kids, their first exposure to pornography is not great. It's not very consensual. And as Ash and I have talked about in our consent and porn discussions on Twitch, is that a lot of the time it's very hardcore. There's very little softcore porn in the world. And it's very focused on stuff that's quite hardcore. And for a lot of kids, that's really distressing. And they don't have a lot of context. And it's tough because sometimes when you tell people, like, hey, most kids have their first exposure to pornography that young, they think that you're creepy. For some reason, just like telling them this fact, they kind of like can assume that you're going to be the one who does it, or that like something must be wrong with you, or it must have been really wrong about your childhood or something, which is unfortunate because it's not true, but it's also just it makes it harder to get people. There's so much shame around it. We have a lot of shame around sexuality, shame around bodies, shame around all of this stuff. So then it makes it a lot harder for people to feel comfortable just having honest discussions in general about like anatomically correct names for body parts. Actually, I think all of this stuff should go. I'm gonna fall asleep in my own house if I'm not careful. All right, sleepy time. Oh, the witch came. Are you gonna turn one of my chickens black? What? Okay. Uh, Citizen Sage said, good topic. My first exposure was at 9. I found hardcore stuff in the woods. Someone left there while on a field trip, and the teacher slipped out. Um, and yeah, Rod, and they take it as a threat rather than it's not even a warning. It's just more like a fact, like, hey, be aware of this, and like, you know, Citizen Shades. This is very much what you're saying is very much the sort of standard. Very happy today. Okay, I'm going to the skull mines. I gotta get ready. Gotta get ready. I'm gonna drop some stuff off here. Just dumping it all in here. I'm gonna regret that later, I'm sure. um, I gotta get some food to take with me. Not in here. Yeah, citizen change. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's very, very, very normal. It's pretty much the default. Most people's first exposure is about that age. And it's almost always just like that, which is that it's not something the kid is very prepared for. It can be really upsetting to some kids. It can be very confusing. There can be a lot of shame associated with it. And that's not great. But then there's also, especially if the adults react really negatively to it, that can really set people up to having essentially sexual dysfunction later in life. Because how a person experiences a lot of stuff in early childhood tends to set the stage for how they're going to experience a lot of their life later. And this is, if you're a parent and you're watching this, this is not to say that, like, if you didn't perfectly react to your child's curiosity about sexuality, you fucked them up forever. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's, as much as possible, really important to be gentle when reacting to children's expressions of curiosity around sex and sexuality, but also just be aware that it is likely that they're going to have these kinds of citizens say it's only 1,000% easier now with the internet for non-consensual exposure, for sure. Arad, and yeah, I think a lot of these things come down to I don't want to think about this or know it, so I'm going to attack you instead of dealing with the root of it. Yeah, for sure. It makes sense. For a lot of people, thinking about children being exposed to pornography is icky, which makes sense. It's not something where it's like, that's not a happy thought, right? That's not a thought where I'm just like, yeah, cool. It's like, nah, damn, that's rough. Rough. That's not what I would want for little kids. And I think a lot of people really want to keep this idea of like forever innocence. And we define innocence as basically unawareness, which is also really risky because if a kid is not aware of their bodies and the things that can happen and the ways in which somebody might try to hurt them, it opens them up to be more at risk for abuse. But again, people often feel really icky about that because they don't want to think about bad things happening to their kids, which again makes sense. But we have to talk about this. If we want to keep kids safe, people have to be able to, create good defenses. And you can't monitor your kids' activity online 24/7. As much as people would like to think that they can, it is genuinely, oh, look at that, I got a black egg, just a black egg. But that's still pretty cool. I think I can put that in an incubator and hatch it at some point. So yeah, it makes sense that people would feel all kinds of ways about all of this. And we still have to deal with it, regardless. So we've been talking about online discourse a good bit. Give me 1 second. I need to, as usual, kind of reply to Charlie's messages at this time. 1 second, everyone. Because it's usually like as he's coming home from work and gotta arrange some things. Um, hmm. Okay. I basically just asked him what he wants to do. So I'll probably have to reply again in a minute, but thank you all for being patient with me. And I will tell him you all say hi. Yes, I was, I guess, supposed to be done streaming like an hour ago. Kind of didn't realize that it was already that late. But anyway, I'm gonna go to the skull mines. I can't buy any more stairs right now, which is rough. So I only got 2 stairs, which I will only use in the event of an emergency, like it overrun. I gotta wait for Pam. Okay. Yeah, as I mentioned at the start, we're doing a little bit of social distancing in the house, sleeping in separate rooms because Charlie had to go to a conference on Monday and there were not the people at work that he's normally in the same room as. Anyway, I think next week I want to talk a little bit, I want to do a little bit of a retrospective on some of the infrastructure stuff we've talked about, a little bit of the history of jaywalking, and what that can tell us about thinking about the future of interacting with cars. I forgot to bring a prismatic shard to get a new sword. Silly. Silly. All right, that's fine. That's fine. Whatever. I've got like 6 prismatic shards sitting in my thing and I just completely forgot about it. Oh well. Save it for another day. So anyway, a little bit of a retrospective on some things and like history of jaywalking and how that affects how we should sort of interact with the future of talking about transit basically and what are the effects likely to be. All right. And then after that, I think I want to move on to another topic that we have touched on a good bit, but I want to give it some more sort of dedicated time, which is looking at friendship and like how to make friends and understanding of loneliness and like why so many of us are chronically lonely and what infrastructure has to do with that. All right, already used one of my 2 stairs to get out of a room that was overrun. That's fine. And so I think that'll be something we talk about for a little while. I think we've touched on a lot of really good topics. I think that I still want to come back to the books Surviving the Future and Secular Cycles because I think those are both pretty evergreen and pretty useful. I think there's a lot we can talk about in those 2 books. Though of course I can't just like straight up read them on chat or on stream because of copyright, unless I got like explicit permission, which I'm not sure I'll be able to do. I mean, like I can read like a chapter or 2, right? Infested again. Okay, I'm just gonna go for it this time because I want to use the other one in like an emergency, like I'm gonna die. Okay, I'm gonna heal myself a little bit already. But I think that these are topics that, for a lot of us, I think many of the people who watch the stream, experience a lot of loneliness, and we've talked about it a lot. Um, and I also want to talk about like what can we do about it? How can we make ourselves less lonely? How can we manage loneliness better? Oh my gosh, these slimes are gonna kill me. Difficult little dudes, huh? But I need 50 slime so I can make a press and not die. Jeez. Ah, okay, time to eat some food. The skull mines are so difficult. And I think I've only gotten one star drop, so like I don't actually have that much health. I gotta look up where to get the other ones so I can actually get on that. And I need to face the correct direction. Oh no. And yeah, I think that, we've talked a lot about, obviously we're going to talk about how infrastructure and like urban design has contributed to a lot of why we're lonely, and also capitalism and sort of like alienation and, alienation from self, alienation from context. These are definitely big things to talk about, and things that really fit with the things we have been talking about. And I do want to talk about loneliness in Stardew Valley. Like, who are the people who seem to be experiencing loneliness and how? And then, obviously it's a kind of a contrived scenario, so it's not going to be perfect, but I think there's a lot of really good stuff to talk about in this game. Oh my goodness. Trying to not get too hurt by these little dudes is difficult. All right. Thankfully, I brought a good bit of food with me. Oh man. Okay. Come on. I'm going to get you, slime, before you get me. Yay. Okay, that was difficult. It took so much time. Even though the spirits are very happy today, I don't think I'm going to make too much progress. So yeah, really, I think it would be good to sort of lean into some of this discussion about loneliness and social isolation and why it's difficult for a lot of us to really make, oh my gosh, this is difficult. This would be a time to use that staircase. Go down. Oh my God. Whew. That was difficult, y'all. That was very difficult. Yeah, it's just, I think a lot of us are pretty chronically lonely, is the point I'm trying to get at here. And I think that it would be good to really dig into it and figure out, causes and talk about it very academically, yes, but then also just IRL, like lived experience. What are things that are making us lonely? And I honestly do think that this sort of like online discourse of like I have to be the most right, the most nuanced, the like morally, intellectually pure, and have the best takes on everything actually exacerbates this problem, because it makes it so fundamentally we feel that our like social positioning is always precarious, and to some extent it is going to be, but the more you've actually built a relationship with people, the more you have a context with them and a community with them, the more resilient these things are going to be, right? The less precarious these relationships are going to be. And this just is sort of start to finish a good thing, right? It's important for us to actually build things, relationships and connections that have, staying power. Oh my goodness. I get into so much trouble in the skull mines, y'all. Oh gosh. Okay. I gotta go over here and eat some eggs. Eat an omelet. Hopefully I don't die from this one little slime. Okay, good. And you're right, Arad. Once I get a new sword, it really should help. Really should help. Oh, yay. Look at that. What did I get? Bombs. That's nice. 10 bombs. Pretty good. So yeah, it's just, I think that I really want to talk about how we can build other contexts with each other. What are some things we can actually do to combat this loneliness? You know, a lot of the stuff we talk about on this channel ends up being about things that we can do sort of long term. I got a second prize room in a row. Rain totem. That's pretty nice. Rain totems are useful. Like especially paying attention to local elections and urban planning, but these are things that are kind of decades off, right? We can change urban planning, but a lot of the time, unless we're kind of got our shit together a lot of these plans are going to be, you know, a very long time before they really start to have big impacts on daily life. And that's not to say that, like, you know, all is lost or it's hopeless or whatever, but more just I want to talk about, like, what can we do now to improve people's experience, and how does one actually build a community, right? How does one actually build friendship? I've read a lot of books that are from like the 60s and 70s with like hippie communes and building social change communities, and again, those books are really focused on communes, like commune living, which is fancy kind of hell, I think. You know, almost all communes have failed, and they almost all failed for the same reasons. Almost always it was because of, you know, sexual harassment and non-consensual behavior and exploitation and like manipulation and everything. Not always. It could also be like they got shut down for legal reasons or financial things went wrong. Yay, 7 levels down. But a lot of them, yeah, shut down because of fundamentally sort of toxic things at their core. And oh yeah, I should heal myself before I keep fighting this guy. Citizens Shades, you said, I think society has a general view that loneliness is a weakness, some kind of personal failing, rather than a confluence of circumstances. Social media and the holier than thou outlook, so many definitely makes things harder. Yes, and that was one of the things we talked about. I don't know if you were here for the beginning of the stream, but we talked about it early on, which is that, like, we were looking at a couple of hot takes that are going around doing numbers, that are kind of like that, which is, you know, someone was saying, you know, all body dysmorphia is actually just fat phobia, and it's just not true. I mean, like, I can see why someone would think that, but this idea, which ends up still being like moralizing mental health struggles as personal failings, and it's a big thing, and people do it even when they feel like they're being very progressive about stuff. And one of the best ways we can push back against it is to just like name it when we see it and create other structures. And some of it has also got to include what we even do just for good consent practices, which is slowing down, thinking about, you know, are there ways in which this thing I'm trying to say might not actually match my beliefs, or might be hard. Now, it's not possible to consider all contexts for everybody ever. You know, this is one of the problems we were talking about, but Citizen Sage, you say, I feel like people are driven to controversial takes to gain praise and ignore those who disagree, even if they don't fully agree with their own take. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I think it's, yeah, one of those things too where it's, yeah, I think you would like this book that I'm reading called You and Your Profile, Authenticity After Prophilicity. It is, yeah, it's a philosophy text I've like talked about a lot or mentioned. I haven't finished it, so I'm not really ready to talk about it on stream in depth, but it's very interesting. Oh my goodness. Okay. This is not like last time when we came to the skull mines and everything was great and I got 10 million uh, prismatic shards and I really need to get some more of those star drops so that I can have a little bit more health and definitely need to get a better sword. A bit more health would make a huge difference because right now it's just really very precarious. Jasper's book. Yes, okay. That is good. I'm going to eat some more food because I'm getting low on health again. Let's just blow some stuff up. Okay, there's a way down there, but there is some more iridium ore. Gotta kill this serpent dude. It's attacking me. Yeah, you know, I think that one of the ways that can help people avoid this difficulty of, you know, having ever more extreme opinions just for the sake of like seeming more right or dunking on other people is just slowing down and like trying not to sort of post online things when you're in a heightened state, because remember, intensity reduces capacity and makes consent riskier. And the more hyped up you are, oh man. Oh, right. I gotta get rid of something if I want to get rid of the sap. I don't need it, but I do want this dinosaur egg. Gosh. Okay, I don't want to do this level, so I'm going to leave the mines. I'm just going to get out of here and head home. Return to Stardew Valley, yes. I'm just going to assume you're talking about Fat Life. Yeah, fire-breathing dinosaurs are really stressful. Oh, look at that. It's so nice to just kind of like empty the inventory. Okay, I'm gonna put the bombs back because I don't really need them, and the food that I take with me. I will take these things out. So yeah, I mean, it's just online rhetoric. Again, just gotta be careful. I do think that it can rot your brain. I think it's really easy to just get really caught up in this idea that like it's possible to just be perfect intellectually and have the most nuanced, most amazing take about everything. It's just not. And you're just gonna make yourself sick trying to do that. I just really want to recommend against trying to do that. It's just not a good thing to do to yourself. It's just not. All right, I gotta go to sleep. Oh, Tenador gave birth to a baby cow. Well, what do we want to name it, y'all? What do we want to name this baby cow? Consent? You know what? Sure. Let's just name it Consent. That's a good one, Ronan. Consent the cow. All right. I should stop here for today. I have been streaming for 3 hours and a change. It's been really lovely to hang out with you all today. Real quick, let me just get this back up. Gonna go back over to here. We have some classes coming up. If you're interested, today we have supporting survivors of sexual trauma, but this is a class we'll host regularly and it is recorded. So if you still want to buy a ticket and get the recording, I think that's possible. Don't quote me on that though. On December 3rd, we have Beyond the Band options for accountability. So if you would like to know about some accountability processes and things that you can do that are not just banning somebody or doing nothing. December 6th, we've got our Consent Basics class. This will be on a Tuesday, so it'll be in the evening European time. Consent Basics is always free, so feel free to join that. Then December 10th, we have Personal Accountability for Leadership. Again, you don't have to be in a formal position of leadership or even informal to come. We'll just be talking a lot about things like accountability for yourself, how to deal with making mistakes, when to make public statements, transparency versus confidentiality. December 15th, we have our American time Consent Basics. So this will be in the evening Pacific time. And then we're almost done with our Consent and Leadership series for this round. But we also have the start of our, 2023 calendar up. So if you're interested, check it out. You can see what we've got coming up for early next year. If you don't, consider following us on social media. If you like what we do here and you want to continue to support free and low-cost consent education, consider supporting us on Patreon. And yeah, I think that's everything I've got for today. Thank you all for joining me, and I will talk to you on Sunday. All right, thank you. Bye.